button. We're aiming for 500 likes on this video, and your support makes that happen. Now, let's get right into the heart of the matter. We're aiming for the 500 likes. Prehistoric conflict that extinguished almost all men, a staggering of the male population. Picture the prehistoric world just before the mysterious decline of the male population. Try to imagine standing on Earth where no city has ever risen, where no concrete has been poured, and no machine has ever roared. Nights were a deep, heavy black, broken only by the light of a cooking fire. Each morning brought a tense uncertainty, a razor's edge between finding food and succumbing to hunger, between survival and utter ruin. That was the ancient Earth before the Great Collapse, the quiet backdrop against which the most profound catastrophe ever to strike men was about to unfold. This forgotten war would effectively wipe them out. On the surface, daily existence appeared simple, but it was threaded with an unrelenting tension. Men and women lived in tribal units, their essential roles dictated purely by the demands of necessity. Men primarily hunted, scouted, and guarded their people, risking their lives constantly to secure meat and repel threats. Women were the steady foundation. They gathered plants and roots, nurtured the children, and maintained the vital social cohesion of the group. Both roles were indispensable. However, it was the men who constantly faced the front lines of peril, where danger lurked with actual teeth or enemy weapons. That same front line would soon morph into a vast, sprawling battlefield that spanned countless generations. The Earth itself was unpredictable. Periods of intense ice ages gave way to warmer periods. Rivers would change their course, animal herds would migrate unpredictably, and essential supplies could simply disappear. A prolonged drought could compel a tribe to move directly into the domain of a rival. Initial contact might involve an uneasy exchange or even a temporary truce. But when resources were scarce, there was little room for enduring trust. When that trust failed, men fought to protect their immediate kin, to seize dwindling resources, and to assert dominance. The essential seeds of this great conflict were deeply sown long before the devastating male collapse swept across the human race. Archaeological findings offer us chilling, broken fragments of this reality. We find stone tools expertly crafted for piercing flesh. We unearth burial sites containing the remains of young men whose bones are scarred by telltale weapon injuries. We discover settlements suddenly abandoned. These scattered clues strongly suggest that widespread violence became routine. No single tribe understood the gravity of their actions, but they were collectively moving down a path that would lead to the destruction of almost every living male. Genetics fills in the deep silence left by the archaeological record. The Y chromosome, which is passed exclusively from father to son, reveals a dramatic bottleneck event. Nearly all distinct male genetic lineages simply vanished around the same time. We're gone. Imagine an intricate tapestry of humanity with billions of male threads, and then picture only a small fraction of those threads remaining. The ensuing collapse wasn't an instantaneous event, but the world was already in a state of genetic unraveling. Visualize the growing strain in those ancient camps. Hunters absent for days might return only to find enemy scouts watching their movements. A young boy who witnessed his father killed by a rival would grow up with a burning sense of vengeance. Trust contracted, focusing almost entirely on direct bloodlines. Every unfamiliar person was correctly perceived as a mortal threat. Male identity was fundamentally tied to being a protector, a hunter, and a warrior. This meant that when conflict arrived, it was the men who were consumed first and most completely. Women's experiences differed profoundly. While men fell in combat, Women were frequently spared and absorbed into the victorious tribes, their children then carrying the conqueror's bloodline. In this way, women became the essential bridge that guaranteed the survival of humanity, while men faced a catastrophic genetic erasure. This deep gender imbalance fundamentally shaped everything that happened after the decline. Before the cataclysmic decline, the world was leaning precariously toward mass disaster. Tribes were pressed together more closely, minor disputes solidified into open warfare, and men bore the heavy load of endless, low-level conflict. Initially, it wasn't a single, enormous war, but literally hundreds of smaller battles that, combined, built into something truly enormous. It was a prehistoric clash whose echoes are still discernible in our DNA. Picture it: fathers instructing their sons, brothers laughing by the firelight, hunters sharing triumphant stories. Then, over centuries, that chorus of male voices slowly faded. Only a tiny minority survived, their specific genetics shaping the world we now inhabit. What force could compel humanity to commit near self-extermination? That is the profound shadow cast upon us by the ancient world before the collapse, the silence written into our DNA. As we delve deeper, we will observe how those initial sparks of conflict ignited into the forgotten war that annihilated almost every man on Earth. Imagine waking up in an early society where almost every man you knew has vanished. Your fathers, your brothers, your sons, gone in a sudden catastrophe so profound that only about 3 out of every 100 survived. It sounds like an ancient fable, a chilling story told around a campfire. Yet, concealed within our DNA, within the Y chromosome, lies a horrific account, a prehistoric war that resulted in the wiping out of virtually the entire male population. To fully grasp how this disaster occurred, we must examine tribal life and the defining gender roles that characterized those early societies. Life in a prehistoric tribe was anything but simple. It was brutally and directly focused on survival. Each day was consumed by the immediate tasks of securing food. Women dedicated themselves to gathering plants, roots, and berries, providing a reliable and steady calorie source that kept groups alive when hunting expeditions failed. Men shouldered the primary responsibility of hunting large game and defending the entire tribe. While this division of labor wasn't absolute, it was common enough to structure everyday existence. And here lies the critical factor. Men's roles were not just dangerous, they were intensely competitive. Imagine small, scattered groups across vast, often harsh landscapes. Resources were critically scarce. Rivers, established hunting grounds, and fertile patches meant the difference between surviving and starving. Men were the ones tasked with securing these vital assets, which frequently meant clashing violently with rivals who were trying to do exactly the same thing. Violence became intrinsically linked with manhood itself. To be a man was to be a protector, to prove your worth, and to ensure the continuation of your specific bloodline. Women possessed a different, essential power. As the bearers of the next generation, their value to the tribe's long-term survival was beyond dispute. Crucially, during conflicts, women were often incorporated into the tribe of the victor. Their children would inherit the conqueror's genetics, while the defeated men were simply killed. Over millennia, this systematic pattern utterly devastated male genetic diversity. These tribal wars weren't merely squabbles over land or food. They were battles at the genetic level. A single, successful conquering clan could erase the male lines of its rivals, while the women guaranteed the legacy of the conqueror would spread widely. The genetic evidence confirms this reality. Virtually all men alive today can trace their ancestry back to only a small handful of male survivors. Daily tribal life was not solely about bloodshed, of course. Fireside stories, communal songs, and shared traditions kept these groups bound together. Women passed down generational knowledge of edible plants and healing medicine. Men formed warrior bands, training for both defense and offensive raids. These responsibilities profoundly shaped individual identity. And when identity is so closely intertwined with conflict, a large-scale catastrophe becomes almost inevitable. It's tempting to idealize tribal life, but the reality was far grittier. Intense rivalry meant men were locked into endless cycles of proving their strength, fighting, and dying. Young boys grew up watching their fathers prepare for battle, instinctively knowing their own future path led there. True value lay not merely in existing, but in constantly competing against the world, against rival men, and sometimes even against their own extended kin. As these wars relentlessly escalated, the consequences spiraled out of control. Tribes didn't engage in polite skirmishes. They practiced total annihilation. Line by line, each act of erasure narrowed the male gene pool until, as genetics starkly shows, were extinct. This was not a lightning-fast event, but the slow, terrible grind of countless conflicts, all sharing the same grim, zero-sum logic. Later, we will look at the specific archaeological evidence that proves this immense scale of violence. We will see why systematic warfare, rather than widespread famine or disease, provides the best explanation for this collapse. But for now, hold on to this realization. Early gender roles didn't just determine who gathered berries or hunted deer. They ultimately determined who lived, who died, and whose genetic legacy would echo through time, shaping one of the most shocking mass extinctions in human history, the war that wiped out almost all men. Imagine carefully digging through the remains of an ancient settlement, gently brushing away layers of accumulated soil and time. You uncover the relics of daily life, homes, essential tools, pottery, and finally, graves. But something feels deeply unsettling. You find plenty of women's remains, along with those of children. However, the graves that should contain adult men are strangely and systematically absent. It is as if half the community vanished overnight. That disturbing, echoing silence found in the earth is the first powerful clue to one of prehistory's most chilling enigmas: the sudden collapse of the vast majority of men. This sobering truth wasn't revealed through a single, perfect discovery, but emerged from a series of puzzling, recurring patterns discovered across numerous sites globally. Villages dating back thousands of years should exhibit a demographic balance of men, women, and children. Instead, the cemeteries often show a significant skew toward females and juveniles. In regions where numerous warrior graves would logically be expected, we find evidence of life being carried on largely by women. It's as though men were systematically wiped out in successive waves, leaving behind a world with a devastating gender imbalance, a scenario screaming of prolonged, targeted violence. Skeletal evidence from Neolithic and Bronze Age sites worldwide points to the existence of mass graves where men were specifically targeted. The bones tell a brutal story, showing clear signs of trauma. Evidence of blunt force skull injuries, arrows lodged in ribs, and severe, shattered bones. Strikingly, women and children were very often spared or, more commonly, assimilated into the group that won the battle. This specific pattern does not align with disease or famine. It precisely fits the description of warfare designed explicitly to erase rival male bloodlines. This is perfectly consistent with the genetic data. The Y chromosome bottleneck demonstrates a severe collapse in male genetic variety. If men were being systematically slaughtered across wide geographic regions, the genetic footprint left behind would look precisely the way it does today. The bones themselves whisper the same consistent tale. The violence was systematic and selective.
And we're going to scroll
Some
all the way
cultural
down to the bottom of
layers
this list,
even
and you'll see
indicate
a related
abrupt
settings
cultural
section down
shifts
at the bottom here,
immediately
and we're just going
following
to
the
choose this
male
one where it
absence.
says choose default.
Entirely
Or
new
we can just
styles of
head
pottery,
over to
different
our side of
tools,
this
and
to
changes in the
things
layout of
broken
the
or
settlement.
corrupted. So
These were
once
not
that's
slow,
issue, into the settings
gradual
of the
transitions, but the
back
clear
over to the start
fingerprints
menu,
of new
and you need to
clans
search for
taking
I'm
over.
going to click on
The
Windows
people who
Notepad here,
crafted the
and simply
pots
click this
and
Get
wielded the
button, and this
weapons
is going
have
to
fundamentally
reinstall the Windows
changed.
Notepad to our
Of
computer.
course,
Over to
archaeology
32,
is
and we need to
complex.
come inside it. And then
Bones
we're going to
can
select Run
decay,
as Administrator,
graves can
and that
be
should now
disturbed,
bring up the...
and
If you still are
interpretations
experiencing problems, then please
inevitably
drop...
differ. Some researchers suggest that disease or famine might have struck men harder, but disease is largely random. These graves demonstrate a clear pattern. Someone, or some groups, was systematically deciding who lived and who died. One particularly haunting case comes from burial pits in Europe dating back approximately years. Adult males are found with brutal, fatal wounds, while the women and children reappear in nearby settlements that exhibit foreign DNA. This is no accident. It is the direct aftermath of organized raids where men were executed and women were absorbed. Imagine yourself among the survivors. Your brothers, fathers, and sons are gone. The remaining women must continue daily life, knowing the men who once defended their homes now lie in hurried, shallow pits. That profound silence of lost male voices is the very silence archaeologists uncover today. These physical traces are more than just bones. They are undeniable fragments of an untold war that violently reshaped the course of human history. They demonstrate why patrilineal clans fought with such overwhelming ferocity, why only a tiny fraction of male lines endured, and how this immense bloodshed reverberates in our modern DNA. The message rising from the soil is unequivocal. The war that killed of men was not a myth. It literally scarred the very bones of our ancestors. And this unsettling realization is only one layer of the mystery. The deeper we investigate, the more the ground reveals the battles fought, the clans that briefly flourished, and the vast numbers of men who disappeared forever. Imagine this striking fact. Every man alive today, regardless of his specific culture, location, or skin color, belongs to a single family tree that was once on the absolute brink of snapping. It wasn't thousands of major branches breaking slowly. It was virtually all of them severed in one swift, catastrophic moment in prehistory. The crucial genetic evidence for this event resides in the Y chromosome, the thread of DNA that travels exclusively from father to son. At a specific time, roughly between and years ago, that vital thread nearly vanished. Here is the most peculiar part. Women's genetic diversity barely registered any change. Their genetic lineages continued to flow consistently across time. However, the Y chromosome experienced a catastrophic collapse. Suddenly, only a small handful of male lineages survived and began to spread so rapidly and so widely that today, billions of men across the globe can trace their ancestry back to them. Scientists label this phenomenon the Y chromosome bottleneck. It is the chilling, direct genetic evidence for the forgotten prehistoric war that led to the death of men. Think of it using an analogy. A massive, sprawling forest filled with countless varieties of trees, each one representing a distinct male bloodline. Then, a massive firestorm races through, leaving only a few trunks still standing. Those few survivors then rapidly reseed the entire area. Centuries later, the forest looks full again, but every new tree grows from the genetic foundation of just those few original trunks. That is exactly what happened to humanity's fathers. What force caused this? If it were widespread disease, famine, or random chance, men and women would have suffered roughly equally. Yet, women's genetic lines remained robust and diverse. That fact points directly to a force selectively aimed at men. When you combine this genetic anomaly with the archaeological discovery of mass graves, evidence of burned settlements, and clear signs of conflict, the story becomes undeniable. This was not a natural event. It was a targeted war. As ancient clans solidified into patrilineal groups, men became both the essential defenders and the tragically expendable casualties. Rival tribes sought not just to defeat their enemies, but to deliberately erase entire male bloodlines. The Y chromosome proves this point definitively. The vast majority of men in that era never successfully passed on their genes. The bottleneck created a sharp, indelible genetic fingerprint that is still clear today. In regions like Central Asia, for example, a huge number of modern men can trace their descent to just a tiny handful of extremely successful ancient warriors. The lineage of Genghis Khan spreading across continents is a slightly later, dramatic echo of this very same process. A few dominant male lines crushing the existing genetic diversity. But consider the immense human side of this tragedy. Fathers, sons, and brothers simply gone. Women suddenly found themselves living among men who were not of their immediate kin. The surviving men carried the immense power and the burden of repopulating and restarting bloodlines. Concepts of kinship, inheritance, and social power were violently and permanently shifted. The Y chromosome bottleneck isn't merely data on chart. It is a powerful genetic whisper, telling us that humanity nearly lost its men entirely. We cannot witness the ancient battles or smell the smoke, but we feel the consequences every time human DNA is analyzed. That profound collapse is literally carved into our species, and the central mystery is how it unfolded. Were there huge, conquering waves of invaders, or did countless small conflicts rapidly snowball into a massive catastrophe? We may never know the precise details, but one fact is clear: the bottleneck is not a theory. It is definitive evidence. A genetic scar left by the forgotten prehistoric war that decimated a man. 7,000 years may seem incredibly distant, but in the context of evolutionary time, it is merely a heartbeat. And in that brief heartbeat, the entire genetic story of humanity changed forever. Imagine waking up to a world where almost every man you know is simply absent. Not just a few and not even most, but almost all of them. That is precisely what happened tens of thousands of years ago in what many scientists term the greatest prehistoric demographic mystery of all. A relentless conflict, or something akin to it, that systematically wiped out of the male population. The objective evidence, the most fascinating aspect, isn't just that men disappeared, but that male genetic diversity, the variety of Y chromosomes transferred from father to son, almost entirely vanished. If I were sharing this over a cup of coffee, you'd probably lean in and ask, wait, how can we possibly know that? The answer lies with geneticists, who act as true genetic detectives, meticulously studying patterns within our chromosomes. What they uncovered was deeply shocking. Around years ago, the historical record of the Y chromosome suddenly and drastically shrinks. Instead of hundreds of different male lines continuing forward, only a tiny handful of lineages manage to survive. It's like a vast, ancient forest reduced to just a few dozen original trunks. That's the unmistakable genetic record. The critical question remains, why? The evidence from women's mitochondrial DNA shows absolutely no corresponding collapse. It is as if women continued moving fluidly between groups while the men were being systematically eliminated. This specific pattern points directly and powerfully toward violence, not widespread disease or universal famine. In prehistoric times, the clan was everything. Survival hinged not merely on individual strength, but on belonging to the correct, powerful group. Rival clans clashed fiercely over control of land and food sources. The victorious clans slaughtered the men and immediately absorbed the women into their ranks. Over the long term, only the conquering male line survived and spread their genetics. That is the single most powerful explanation for why male genetic diversity was so catastrophically diminished. Let's be fair. Not all scientists agreed that warfare was the sole cause. Some alternative theories suggested universal famine, extreme climate collapse, or even a specific Y-linked disease that only struck men harder. A severe drought could certainly propel tribes into deadly conflict, and a unique disease might disproportionately kill more men. But none of these alternatives fully explain why women's genetic diversity remains so robust. The warfare theory fits best. Women were spared and absorbed, while men were targeted for erasure. And here's the most profound, eerie part. We still feel that genetic echo today. Modern men all over the globe share Y chromosomes originating from only a minuscule number of ancient male ancestors. Entire continents exhibit this pattern, meaning many of us are genetic distant cousins without ever knowing it. It's a chilling thought that our very modern existence may be thanks to the brutal, winner-take-all choices made by long-forgotten ancient tribes. Remember the concept of the clash between patrilineal clans? This is where the ideas perfectly align. Patrilineal systems meant that social authority, identity, and power were all tied tightly to the male ancestry. If your father's line failed, your entire future failed with it. Therefore, clans likely fought not only to seize resources, but also to obliterate rival male lineages entirely. That ruthless, cold logic left a clear fingerprint on our DNA that we can still read millennia later. And yet, there's something profoundly resilient about this story too. Out of the utter chaos, a select few male lines endured, carrying the essential genetic framework of humanity forward. The Y chromosome bottleneck was not the absolute end of man. It was a ruthless systemic reset. Those few surviving lines then rapidly reproduced and spread, shaping the male population that we see today. But the central, human mystery still lingers. What was it truly like for the people living through that sudden collapse? Did they possess any sense that they were on the terrifying brink of extinction? Did their stories or myths somehow preserve the memory of it? Later, major cultures certainly carried narratives of immense wars, devastating floods, and near annihilation events. Could those possibly be the distant, fragmented memories of this prehistoric catastrophe? We'll explore those cultural echoes later, but it's a vital idea to keep in mind. Even our oldest myths might hold powerful whispers of the truth. So, why did male genetic diversity nearly vanish? The simplest, most brutal answer is the survival of a violent few and the systematic erasure of the multitude. That is the principle that ties this entire mystery together. The forgotten prehistoric war was not just a skirmish fought with stone axes. It was a war written into our very blood, and every man alive today carries its lasting shadow. Because when of men disappeared, the ultimate story of humanity was changed forever. Imagine a stark world where your immediate bloodline is your entire identity, where the lineage of your father and his father before him determines whether you eat, whether you're forced to fight, and whether you will even survive until the next season. This was the profound reality of the prehistoric world just before the collapse, and it perfectly set the stage for one of the most deadly engines in human history: the intense competition between patrilineal clans. It was from this specific, merciless competition that the war that wiped out nearly all men would brutally emerge. Patrilineal simply means that ancestry, status, and rights are traced exclusively through the father's line. In these ancient societies, men inherited the clan name, the hunting and water rights, and the authority to pass on land or essential tools to their own sons. To belong to the community was to directly inherit your father's status and name. But here is the inherent, brutal risk. If your clan was extinguished, your father's line was ended permanently. In a world where basic survival was already delicate, that crushing fear of total erasure transformed every neighboring clan into a serious, looming threat. Picture two distinct groups settling near the same important river. One controls the essential upstream waters, the other the downstream section. A severe season arrives. The fish runs dwindle, the water level drops, and suddenly, both groups eye each other with profound suspicion. A minor theft, a perceived insult, and the spark of conflict ignites. When the inevitable clash occurred, it wasn't simply about regaining stolen food. It was about whether one patriline would dominate and the other would vanish entirely. Because men were the carriers of the essential clan identity, they were the ones who became the primary targets. Killing rival males was not random, generalized violence. It was a cold, calculated, and brutal strategy for erasing a rival bloodline from the map forever. Archaeologists studying this critical period have consistently noted the same patterns. Male skeletons bear significantly more weapon marks than female ones. Graves show consistent clusters of women and children surviving after major battles, while the men are either entirely missing or hastily buried in mass pits. This was not a coincidence. It was military strategy. By eliminating the rival men, you didn't just weaken their defense, you also guaranteed the absorption of their women and children into your own group. Their blood then became integrated into your clan's genetic pool, and their previous identity was effectively eliminated. And this is where the genetics powerfully confirms the archaeology. The Y chromosome, which is passed only from father to son, nearly disappeared on a global scale during this precise time frame. Of all male lines vanished. This staggering, one-sided collapse was clearly not caused by famine or plague alone, as those would have killed men and women equally. No, the selective, targeted destruction of male bloodlines points directly to the devastating effects of clan warfare, to deliberate battles where men were the targets and women were the spoils. Think for a moment about the psychological toll. Imagine growing up with the knowledge that your father's survival hinged not on the weather or luck, but on the ruthless willingness of other men to wipe him out. Young boys carried that same burden, expected to defend the clan the moment they came of age. But for the vast majority, manhood meant walking directly into the very wars their fathers had initiated. One critical mistake, one unlucky ambush, and their entire bloodline was permanently ended. That immense pressure forged entire generations in the crucible of war. Women, meanwhile, were systematically incorporated into the victors' clans. A conquered woman might lose her family and name, but her children would continue to live under the new clan's authority. For the continuity of the tribe, this was a survival mechanism. For the vanquished men, it meant utter annihilation. Their stories ended the moment their clan fell, their names carried only in fearful whispers before eventually fading altogether. This ruthless arithmetic of survival perfectly explains why male lineages crashed with such extraordinary violence. Yet, the competition wasn't mindless. It followed a grim, consistent logic. If essential resources were scarce, you simply couldn't afford to share them. If your neighbor's sons grew to adulthood, they would inevitably challenge your own sons for the crucial hunting grounds. Striking first, killing their men before they killed yours, became the core strategy for long-term survival. It was a cycle with no escape, one that gathered unstoppable momentum until it reached a catastrophic, global scale. That is the desperate world in which the Forgotten War took root. A world where every vital resource, every river, every stretch of fertile land, every herd of animals was a prize worth killing for. A world where men were tragically both the necessary sword and the primary target. Where patrilineal clans locked themselves into a mutual, terrifying death spiral. The collapse of men was not merely a tragic accident. It was the brutal, logical consequence of a social system where inheritance, group survival, and male identity were inextricably linked. When you view it through this lens, the forgotten prehistoric war doesn't appear to be an inexplicable mystery at all. It seems almost inevitable. Rival clans could not possibly coexist forever when their very survival fundamentally depended on the elimination of the other. And so, they fought and they killed until only a handful of male bloodlines remained standing. Those survivors, just a small sliver of the total male population, carried their precious Y chromosomes forward. Every man alive today descends from those few fortunate clans who somehow made it through the inferno. But this wasn't the final chapter, because once the war between patrilineal clans began to escalate, it didn't halt at simple rivalry. It spiraled into a campaign of total annihilation, swift raids, mass killings, entire tribes of men completely erased in single generations. And that, as we will explore next, is how the forgotten prehistoric war consumed nearly all the men who once walked the earth. Close your eyes and try to picture this scene. A long, green valley, richly supplied with clean rivers, abundant game, and fertile soil. For the tribe that inhabits it, this valley is life itself. But just over the distant ridge, a rival tribe spots the same perfect land, sees the same immense promise, and they desperately want it too. In the prehistoric era, that core clash of desires was not resolved through polite negotiation or formal treaties. It was settled with sharpened stone, with fire, and with blood. And it was out of these escalating life and death battles over essential land and finite resources that the specific kind of warfare grew, a type that may have directly driven the catastrophic collapse of the male population, leaving only 3 out of every 100 alive. In small, often isolated communities, survival hinged completely on reliable access to food and water. A particularly good hunting ground or a dependable, fertile patch of earth could guarantee healthy children and full bellies for years. But essential resources were never guaranteed. Climate shifts, periods of severe drought, or aggressive overhunting made good, reliable land even more incredibly precious. As tribes were forced closer and closer together, conflict was not just a possibility. It became inevitable. And because men were the fighters, the ones dispatched to secure these vital necessities, their lives became the ultimate currency of survival. Initially, these conflicts may have involved only small, brief raids, a rapid strike at dawn, the theft of crucial livestock, or the act of driving rivals away from valuable stream. But humanity possesses a clear, dangerous tendency toward escalation. Every minor victory demanded a subsequent, more violent. Before long, disputes were no longer about a single deer or a patch of berries. They transformed into wars of annihilation, protracted struggles to completely erase rival clans. And when total erasure became the defined goal, men were the ones most frequently targeted. Why the men? Because they exclusively carried the rival bloodlines. Kill the men, and you cut off the future of that entire lineage. The women could then be spared, integrated into the conquering group, and their children born into the victorious tribe's name. But the men, the defenders, the rivals, the potential avengers, had to be eliminated. It's a pattern of strategic warfare that we have seen echoed across all of human history. But in prehistory, the scale of this systematic elimination may have been almost unimaginable. Again and again, across countless territories, clan after clan, the men were systematically slaughtered in these relentless cycles of conquest. This went on until the genetic diversity within the male population collapsed to a point near total obliteration. Consider how this catastrophic escalation functioned. Tribe A violently seizes land from Tribe B. They execute the men, capture the women, and thus grow their territory and population base. Tribe C observes Tribe A's rapid ascent and determines they must strike preemptively before they themselves are overwhelmed and eliminated. The entire destructive cycle repeats, with each turn becoming exponentially harsher than the last. What started as small skirmishes over essential resources like rivers and fertile fields swiftly morphed into a devastating spiral of violence that jeopardized every single male lineage that dared to stand in the way. Archaeological evidence provides stark hints of the sheer brutality of these conflicts. Sites uncovered worldwide reveal entire groups of men hastily buried together, their bones deeply scarred by weapons, forming mass graves that suggest sudden, brutally violent conclusions to their lives. When we align this grim physical evidence with the discovery of the Y chromosome genetic bottleneck, the picture becomes chillingly clear. Men were dying in overwhelming numbers, while women were enduring, often integrated into the bloodlines of the conquering groups. This outcome wasn't the result of famine selectively picking off the physically weak, nor was it a disease striking at random. It was targeted, merciless warfare waged over essential land and finite resources. Now, try to imagine the immense psychological toll. Growing up as a boy in such a world meant existing with a near certainty that your path to adulthood led directly to the battlefield. You weren't just trained and hardened for the everyday hunt. You were prepared for the inevitable, lethal clash with rivals. To hesitate was to guarantee death, and to lose meant vanishing completely from human history. The stakes involved were nothing less than the continuation of your entire existence. This is the primary reason why systematic warfare, more than famine or disease, remains the strongest explanation for the near total erasure of man. Food scarcity might weaken a tribe or even cause widespread death, but it would not, by itself, wipe out only the males. Epidemics typically strike indiscriminately, leaving traces in the genetic lines of both men and women. But the genetic evidence we see today points to something uniquely, chillingly specific. Men were being removed systematically while women were, for the most part, spared and survived. This only adheres to the brutal, efficient logic of warfare. Escalation is the defining word. Once this cycle of violence began, it proved almost impossible to halt. Each new generation inherited the intense, bitter grudges of the last. Each victory, however brief, carried within it the potent seeds of the next, larger conflict. The basic drive for resources ignited the fire, but powerful human traits like pride, vengeance, and the thirst for dominance perpetually fanned the deadly flames. By the time the dust finally settled, if it ever truly did, an estimated of men have been lost, their distinct bloodlines permanently wiped clean from the human tapestry. Later, we will explore how this catastrophic male scarcity fundamentally reshaped the societies that survived, drastically altering power structures, inheritance customs, and even the core cultural myths themselves. But standing here, amidst the fury of escalating tribal warfare, the mechanism is clear. It didn't start with legends or a sudden, divine catastrophe, but with something tragically and deeply human: the endless, brutal struggle over land, over resources, and over survival. And that struggle grew into a war unlike any other. The forgotten prehistoric conflict that nearly eradicated all men. Picture two fierce tribes converging on an open plain millennia ago. The sun blazes, weapons gleam menacingly, and the air is thick with a tension you could practically cut. Yet, this encounter is about far more than just territory or food. At stake is blood itself, the determination of whose sons would thrive and carry on the name, and whose would be erased forever. This was not war as we understand it today, with formal nations and treaties. This was raw, prehistoric survival, where the calculated obliteration of rival male bloodlines became a deliberate, key strategy that shaped the very DNA of the human race. When archaeologists and geneticists collaborate to reconstruct the story of the prehistoric war that killed almost all men, the concept of targeted lineage elimination consistently appears like a dark shadow behind every piece of evidence. Rival clans were not satisfied with simply defeating their enemy in a single battle. For them, victory meant more than a few scattered killings. It meant erasing the enemy's lineage from existence itself. Men were executed in swift waves, their sons cut down, and their elders left to perish. Women, conversely, were assimilated into the victorious clan, thereby ensuring that only the conqueror's Y chromosomes, the indelible markers of the male lines, would be carried forward into the future. Consider the brutal intent behind this strategy. If you successfully defeat a rival but allow their sons to survive, their bloodline continues to pose a competitive threat to yours. However, if you erase them entirely, your own male line achieves total genetic dominance. This merciless logic perfectly explains why male genetic diversity all but vanished during this critical period. It was not mere random chance. It was calculated, systemic elimination. Hints of this zero-sum strategy are evident in both the archaeological record and in ancient oral traditions. Mass graves discovered across parts of Europe and Asia consistently show men with fatal, violent injuries, while the notable absence of female bodies strongly suggests the women were captured rather than killed. Myths and legends passed down through countless generations often tell stories of rival tribes being wiped out to the last man, while the women are explicitly described as being taken as wives or integrated into the conquering group. These narratives aren't simply poetic. They echo the harsh, undeniable reality of prehistoric conquest. This wasn't a single, isolated event, but a repeating, relentless cycle. Clan after clan would rise to prominence, engage in conflict, and then be systematically erased. Each time one male bloodline disappeared, the dominance of another grew exponentially stronger. The Y chromosome bottleneck we observe in modern genetics, where virtually all contemporary men descend from only a tiny handful of ancient male ancestors, makes perfect, logical sense when you envision countless rival lines being utterly wiped out in this manner. The strategy involved more than just brute force. It was deeply strategic. Imagine a tribe planning a raid. Their ultimate objective wasn't simply food or land, but to eliminate the very possibility of a rival line continuing. They would kill the men swiftly and completely, then take the women and children as captives, folding them into their society. Over generations, those children were raised under the conqueror's identity. Their father's original line was erased as thoroughly as if it had never existed. It was a terrifyingly effective method of rewriting human history. What makes this reality so profoundly haunting is its permanence. Once a bloodline was cut, it was gone forever. Entire groups of men, with their unique stories, traditions, and distinct genetic codes, disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only their scattered bones. In their place, the victor's line expanded, cementing its dominance. This cycle of systematic extinction and subsequent absorption is what fundamentally sculpted the human population into what we are today. Remember the archaeological traces of male decline we discussed? Those graves filled with slain men tell the identical story: targeted violence. But now, paired with the overwhelming genetic evidence, the picture crystallizes. This was not just random killing in the heat of battle. It was a systematic strategy to remove rival males from the future itself. And reflect on what this meant for the female survivors. They became living bridges between the destroyed past and the future claimed by the conquerors. Their children bore the victor's blood, while the memory of their lost fathers slowly faded. Entire identities dissolved within a single generation, leaving only faint fragments in myth and legend. Even today, geneticists studying modern populations see the unmistakable dominance of certain male lines. This is not genetic drift or accident. It is the indelible fingerprint of prehistoric warfare, where eliminating rival bloodlines was seen as being just as vital as achieving survival itself. The fact that nearly all men alive today trace their ancestry back to a shockingly small number of ancient fathers is living, genetic proof of how devastatingly effective the strategy was. The war that killed of men was not simply about death. It was about systematic disappearance. Bloodlines were deliberately cut out, as if a sharp blade had removed them from humanity's story. Though time has buried the specific details, the echoes persist in our DNA, a chilling reminder that survival was once purchased at the cost of erasing entire male histories. The more data we uncover, the clearer it becomes. This was not chaos. It was strategy. And only by tracing these lost bloodlines do we begin to grasp the true scale of the forgotten prehistoric war. Imagine a tranquil valley thousands of years ago. Smoke from cooking fires drifts gently into the sky. Children play near the winding river, and men diligently sharpen their spears at the edge of the encampment. It appears profoundly peaceful. Yet, within a matter of hours, that same valley could be carpeted with bodies. Entire groups of men violently cut down, their blood soaking into the earth, their names and their potential futures wiped away. This wasn't a rare or isolated tragedy. It was a repeated pattern enacted across prehistoric landscapes, leaving behind the deepest scar in human history, the war that killed of all men. When scientists began uncovering ancient mass graves dating specifically to this period, The evidence was undeniable. Rows of skeletons, overwhelmingly male, their bones bearing clear marks of violence, blade wounds, crushed skulls, and the occasional arrow point still lodged between the ribs. These remains were not accidents, nor were they victims of natural famine. They were evidence of deliberate, organized, and merciless killings. Crucially, the women and children were often conspicuously missing from these mass grave sites. This specific detail points to the chilling practice. Women were spared and absorbed into the conqueror's tribes, while the men were systematically exterminated. Why such ruthless, selective targeting? The answer lies in the fundamental structure of early tribal societies. In many parts of the world, essential elements like land, social power, and identity were passed down exclusively through the male line. Rival tribes were therefore not just attacking for food or territory. They were erasing entire bloodlines. By killing the men and seizing the women, they ensured their own Y chromosomes would proliferate while their enemies vanished forever. This practice was not just a matter of immediate survival. It was about genetic dominance. It was literally about rewriting the future genetic history of humanity. Remember our discussion of the Y chromosome bottleneck? This is where those staggering numbers become tragically understandable. Genetic evidence reveals that nearly all male lineages dramatically collapsed around years ago. The most parsimonious explanation is that the majority of men simply did not survive long enough to pass on their genes. Warfare was not a random, chaotic event. It was systematic. Intergroup conflict spiraled into mass purges, leaving only a tiny handful of victorious clans to father the subsequent generations. The archaeological record powerfully reinforces this bleak picture. Sites across Europe, Asia, and even the Americas repeatedly tell the identical story. Villages burned, male skeletons piled together, weapons scattered among the dead. One notorious example is the Talheim death pit in Germany, where dozens of individuals were slaughtered around years ago. The victims were predominantly men killed violently, while women were notably absent, almost certainly taken by the attacking group. Other sites mirror this same brutal rhythm. It was a form of genocide on a scale that continues to haunt our DNA today. Take a moment to fully grasp the human cost of this. Imagine being a young boy, barely old enough to hold a spear, forced to defend your tribe as savage raiders stormed in. Imagine fathers bravely standing in front of their families, only to be struck down one after another. The victims didn't just lose their lives, they lost their futures, their legacies, and their place in the ongoing story of human history. Every genetic line cut short was like an entire library burned to the ground. Unique stories and identities gone forever. It's easy to dismiss prehistoric people as simple, but these mass conflicts required a high degree of coordination, strategy, and collective decision-making. To successfully wipe out an entire male population, the attackers had to meticulously plan the raids, execute them with chilling precision, and enforce the grim, strategic rule of sparing only the women. That level of organization shows us that even in this early stage, humans had grasped the brutal arithmetic of genetic survival. Kill the rival man, and you kill their bloodline. And here's the most unsettling continuity. The echoes of this practice did not vanish in prehistory. Much later, in the age of empires, powerful conquerors like Genghis Khan employed strikingly similar strategies, systematically eliminating rival men while ensuring the massive spread of their own lineage. It is a recurring, dark theme in human conflict, but its origins stretch back to the forgotten war that fundamentally reshaped our species. The mass killings and intergroup conflicts were not just about abstract numbers on a battlefield. They were about shaping the very genetic foundation of humanity. The survivors, those few men whose clans ultimately triumphed, became the ancestors of nearly all men alive today. When you trace the lines backward, you find them converging again and again, branching outward from just a handful of victors who endured while so many others perished. Thus, the next time you reflect on the vast diversity of cultures, languages, and faces around the globe, remember that beneath it all lies a hidden, profound uniformity, a shadow of genetic sameness in the Y chromosome. That uniformity was born in blood, in valleys filled with the bodies of men who lost their place in the story. And while the earth has long since absorbed their physical remains, the silence of those mass killings still dictates, in a hidden way, who we are. The war was not a single battle, or even one generation struggle. It was countless raids and massacres compounding over time until men were gone. And every time we uncover another mass grave, it is like hearing the stark echo of that forgotten war, reminding us how terribly close humanity came to losing nearly all its fathers. Picture this moment. The thick smoke of a recent battle still hangs heavy in the air. The ground is littered with broken weapons and bodies. The intense shouts of conflict have faded into an absolute silence. What happens next? The victorious men step forward, not just to claim the captured land or the remaining resources, but to take something far more personal and genetically significant. They take the women of the defeated tribe. This practice was one of the most haunting and consistent patterns of the forgotten prehistoric war that annihilated of all men. Women were not simply victims. They were strategically absorbed into the conquering tribes, becoming both essential survivors and the carriers of the victors' bloodlines. Now, that idea sounds utterly brutal, but it is the key insight that resolves one of the strangest genetic puzzles in human history. Why did male genetic diversity nearly vanish while female diversity remained robust? Recall our discussion of the Y chromosome bottleneck. Male lines collapsed to almost nothing, but women's mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA, which is passed only through the mother, tells a radically different story. Female genetic variety survived and stayed strong. That only makes logical sense if women were continually moving between groups, often forcibly, while the men of the losing groups were being systematically wiped out. Imagine how this unfolded in the harsh reality of daily life. A tribe loses all its fighting-age men in a decisive battle. The women, regardless of age, are captured. For the victors, taking them served two crucial purposes. First, it swelled their own numbers, adding immediate labor, caregivers, and childbearers to the group. Second, and most importantly, it genetically erased the rival tribe's identity, because any children born afterward would carry only the victor's Y chromosomes. Over generations, this established a brutal, yet incredibly efficient cycle. Conquer, absorb, expand. It was not just conventional warfare, it was genetic domination. This is where the findings of archaeology and genetics meet in deeply unsettling ways. Excavation sites occasionally reveal a curious demographic imbalance. Women from geographically distant regions found buried alongside men who were clearly native to the area. This strongly suggests that women were forcibly relocated or assimilated, while the men of the defeated groups often disappeared without a trace. Pair that archaeological detail with the genetic evidence, and the story becomes unmistakable. Whole male bloodlines were extinguished, while women became the living bridge between warring tribes. It's vital to consider the human experience of these women. Some undoubtedly adapted swiftly, finding safety and security within the victorious tribe. Others certainly lived with profound, unresolvable grief, permanently severed from the fathers, brothers, and sons who never returned. Their roles shifted dramatically, but their survival ensured that their genetic legacy endured, even as the men's legacy was brutally cut short. In a cruel twist of historical fate, women became the keepers of continuity through unimaginable chaos. Without them, the human story might well have ended altogether. This practice of absorbing women is not unique to prehistory. History is full of later echoes of the same pattern. Think of Mongol conquests, Viking raids, or countless tribal wars throughout the ages. Again and again, victorious men eliminated their male rivals while integrating the women into their own fold. The prehistoric collapse, however, was the extreme version of this recurring human strategy, reaching a scale so devastating that nearly every male line outside of a handful of victors was erased. Let's connect this to the broader cultural picture. When women were absorbed into conquering tribes, it reshaped far more than just genetics. It reshaped culture. Stories, essential knowledge, unique songs, and practical skills traveled with them. Women carried languages, complex rituals, and deep memories from one group to another, often blending traditions into a new, composite culture. Imagine a child being raised in a victorious tribe, whose mother whispered lullabies and tales from a conquered land. Over time, cultures mixed and merged, even as the men's original lines vanished. It was a subtle, hidden form of influence, survival through memory as much as through blood. But the cost to the women was immense. For the women themselves, survival often meant the loss of choice and autonomy. They became involuntary symbols of victory and functional tools of continuity. Their lives were utterly rewritten by the outcome of battles they did not personally fight. Yet, this same role also guaranteed their survival when men were not spared. They became the thread that connected humanity across generations, while the male thread was violently cut. This absorption of women into conquering tribes is crucial for understanding why the forgotten prehistoric war left such an indelible mark. It explains the strange genetic puzzle, shows us how power was transmitted not solely through the sword but through the womb, and reminds us that while men's bloodlines nearly vanished, women's resilience ensured the survival of humanity itself. When men disappeared, the women carried the narrative forward, not through monuments or written records, but in their children, their voices, and the echoes of their culture. They became the living bridge across humanity's darkest, most destructive war. Picture a world where almost every male bloodline has been cut short. The fierce battles are over. The relentless raids have left whole villages empty of men, and only a very small number of clans remain standing. Their sons survive. Their fathers' names and legacies endure, while countless others are gone forever. This is the stark aftermath of the forgotten prehistoric war. And it is here, in the ruins of a near-total male collapse, that the surviving clans achieved an extraordinary, permanent form of genetic dominance. Their specific Y chromosomes became the foundational genetic material for nearly every man alive today. The key to understanding this phenomenon lies in the rigid nature of male inheritance. Male identity was intrinsically tied to the Y chromosome, passed strictly from father to son. When rival clans were slaughtered, their Y chromosomes were permanently extinguished with them. However, the victorious clans strategically absorbed the women from the defeated groups, ensuring that their own male lineages expanded rapidly while others were totally lost. The women served as the essential bridge between the dead and the living, but the genetic male identity always came from the conquerors. Over many generations, this created a de facto genetic monopoly, where only a handful of victorious lineages completely dominated the genetic future of the species. Scientists can literally trace this transition in our modern DNA. Genetic studies show that, roughly 2 years ago, the diversity of Y chromosomes plummeted dramatically. It was as if the world's male population was forced through a genetic bottleneck controlled by a few surviving clans. Imagine billions of potential male ancestors simply erased, leaving just a minute fraction to populate the future world. Critically, this collapse did not happen to women's mtDNA, which remained diverse. That observation is the clearest, most definitive sign of the events. Men were killed selectively, women were absorbed, and the Y chromosomes of a tiny group of victors spread rapidly across entire continents. Consider the speed of this change. A single clan, after comprehensively conquering its rivals, could suddenly find its sons and grandsons fathering dozens of children, while the bloodlines of the defeated stopped absolutely. Within just a few centuries, the entire genetic landscape had been transformed. A man alive today can often trace his Y chromosome back to one of only a few ancient patriarchs who survived this brutal, selective culling. It is a chilling, yet scientifically remarkable, fact. Entire nations built from the legacy of a handful of survivors. This genetic dominance was not a random outcome. It was deeply rooted in power and strategic warfare. Clans that possessed the best organization, the mastery of warfare, or those who simply struck first and most ruthlessly in the conflicts gained far more than territory. They gained the genetic future. Every child born under their name reinforced their permanent genetic control. It's a powerful, self-reinforcing cycle that makes perfect sense in a world defined by scarcity. Victory meant not just immediate survival, but exponential genetic growth. Defeat meant total oblivion. This legacy explains why today, when geneticists study global populations, they frequently find massive clusters of men who all share nearly identical Y chromosomes. One famous historical example is the so-called descendants of Genghis Khan effect, where millions of men carry DNA linked to his lineage. But this phenomenon did not start in medieval times. It began in prehistory, when a handful of clans survived the Great Male Collapse and imprinted their genetics across the world. For the people living through it, however, this wasn't an abstract scientific concept. It was a matter of life or death. A boy growing up in a victorious clan inherited protection, resources, and status that his rivals never could. His children would proudly carry his father's name and line. Meanwhile, the sons of defeated men never had that chance. They were often wiped out before they could leave a single descendant. The sheer scale of this genetic dominance is the fundamental reason why male lineages disappeared while a tiny few spread so widely they still shape humanity today. But this dominance came with immense consequences. Concentrating social power in so few clans naturally led to societies becoming more hierarchical and more rigidly structured. Kinship became rigidly revolved around male inheritance. Women's roles became tightly linked to ensuring continuity through their absorption into the dominant groups. Over time, this violently reshaped how people understood family, social authority, and the very concept of survival itself. The echoes of those foundational shifts remain with us today, in customs like surnames, inheritance laws, and established patriarchal structures. Therefore, when we discuss the forgotten prehistoric war, the story does not end with the slaughter. It continues in the DNA of every man alive. Each Y chromosome we carry is a silent monument to the ruthlessness of survival. A reminder that our ancestors were not just lucky, but effective enough to endure when countless others vanished. The war killed of men, but it also crowned a tiny fraction with a terrifying form of genetic immortality written directly into the human genome. And that raises a haunting, profound question. If survival once absolutely depended on the systematic eradication of every rival male, how much of that ancient, aggressive competitive instinct still lingers within us today? The dominance of surviving clans didn't just shape our DNA. It shaped the fundamental way humans compete, fight, and build power. The deeper we delve into this mystery, the more we realize that the forgotten war never truly ended. It lives on inside us. If you were to carefully dig into the earth and uncover a prehistoric graveyard, what story would those silent bones reveal? Broken skulls, shattered ribs, mass burials of men clustered together in signs of sudden, violent death. Archaeology paints one clear, local picture of relentless violence. But then, if you turn to genetics and meticulously peer into the strands of DNA passed down through thousands of generations, you find an entirely different global picture: the Y chromosome bottleneck. This is genetic proof that nearly all male lineages were eradicated in some catastrophic, widespread event. The true mystery lies in how these two powerful clues, one buried in the ground, the other hidden in our blood, fit together to tell the singular, devastating story of the forgotten prehistoric war that killed of men. Archaeologists have consistently unearthed evidence of profound violence in ancient times. Skeletal remains show telltale arrowheads embedded in bones, skulls violently crushed by blunt weapons, and entire groups buried together in hurried, shallow mass graves. Crucially, some sites reveal that men were slain while women and children were systematically spared. These findings suggest targeted, selective killings, not random misfortune. It's the precise pattern that matches the logic of warfare: conquerors wiping out rival males while absorbing the remaining population into their own tribes. But bones alone cannot convey the full, global scope. Were these isolated, regional massacres, or were they part of a single, much larger phenomenon? That is where genetics enters the story with definitive data. When scientists analyze the Y chromosome, the specific strand of DNA passed directly from father to son, they found a shocking, uniform collapse. Around years ago, nearly all male genetic diversity vanished. Imagine a world where billions of unique male bloodlines simply terminated, leaving only a tiny handful to continue the human line. Women's genetic lines, mtDNA, however, show no such corresponding collapse. Their diversity remained strong, confirming that women were surviving and reproducing even as the men were disappearing. This is not the footprint of famine or plague. It is the clear, decisive footprint of systematic male extermination. The beauty and frustration of archaeology is its immediacy and specificity. You can see and touch the direct evidence: a skeleton with spear marks, a burned-out village site, weapons scattered in the dirt. It places you directly in the scene of the crime. But archaeology is inherently local. One site may clearly show slaughter, but the next 100 might not. Genetics, by contrast, is global. Every human alive today carries in their DNA the echoes of that massive bottleneck. Genetics tells us the collapse was not merely regional. It was widespread across continents and populations. The core challenge is, can the bones and the genes be woven into one single, consistent narrative? Let's synthesize the evidence. Archaeology shows men being killed in groups, often in violent raids or localized wars. Genetics shows that male bloodlines collapsed across the globe, all at roughly the same geological time frame. Combined, this suggests not a collection of isolated battles, but a wave of relentlessly escalating conflicts. Wars so pervasive and unforgiving that they nearly erased the male half of humanity. Each successful tribe killed the men, absorbed the women, and passed on their distinct Y chromosome. Over successive generations, this repeated until only a genetic sliver of male lineages remained. Skeptics might reasonably ask, could an ancient disease have caused a collapse instead? But if a plague had been the culprit, both men and women would show a measurable genetic loss. Archaeology, too, would reveal mass graves containing a mix of sexes and ages. That is demonstrably not what we see. Another theory suggests famine, but widespread hunger. Again, the physical and genetic evidence simply does not match. The only explanation that comprehensively fits both the archaeological massacre sites and the male-specific genetic bottleneck is systematic warfare. Warfare that was escalating, widespread, and devastatingly selective. It is haunting to visualize entire valleys drenched in blood, villages burned to ash, young men cut down before they could father children. And yet, just beyond those ruins, the women endured, surviving and carrying on the bloodlines of their conquerors. The archaeological record provides us with the scene-by-scene details, the shattered bones and the burned homes. The genetic record provides us with the long view, the undeniable, quantifiable fact that almost all men vanished. Remember when we discussed escalating tribal warfare? This is the moment the puzzle pieces lock completely together. The archaeological massacres are the physical fingerprints of that violence. The genetics is the global ledger showing the total cumulative cost. One tells us what happened on the ground. The other tells us how it irrevocably reshaped humanity for millennia to come. Even today, scientists are working diligently to connect specific archaeological sites with measurable genetic shifts in nearby populations, attempting to create a precise map of destruction and survival. Each new discovery, whether a grave filled with slain men or a DNA sequence showing a vanished lineage, adds another brushstroke to the emerging picture. Slowly, archaeology and genetics are powerfully converging on the same unsettling truth. A prehistoric war so vast and merciless that it killed a man. Yet, the story does not end with this genocide. Later, we will explore how the ensuing male scarcity drastically reshaped kinship rules, inheritance laws, and even the cultural myths that have echoed down to us. But right here, in the compelling dialogue between ancient bones and modern genes, we see the clearest evidence yet. Archaeology reveals the violence. Genetics confirms its scale. Together, they reveal the forgotten war that nearly erased men from the earth. Imagine a world where the essential fields have utterly withered, the rivers have dried to trickles, and game has vanished from the forests. Hunger gnaws constantly at every stomach, and sheer desperation becomes the daily rhythm of life. Or picture something perhaps even more terrifying, an unseen, silent sickness sweeping through the ancient camps, sparing some while striking others down in successive, brutal waves. When scientists initially uncovered the startling evidence of a prehistoric collapse in male populations, some logically wondered if famine or disease, rather than targeted warfare, might have been the primary silent killers. After all, recorded human history is replete with examples of both mass hunger and widespread plagues wiping out millions. Could these factors alone explain the sudden disappearance of nearly all men? Famine often seems like a natural and immediate suspect. Early human societies were deeply, intrinsically vulnerable to any rapid changes in climate. A major shift in rainfall patterns, a cooling of the global earth, or aggressive overhunting could instantly plunge entire tribes into mass starvation. In such dire conditions, men, often the primary hunters and warriors, might indeed have been the first to perish. They faced the constant dangers of long, fruitless hunts, undertook perilous journeys for food, and in times of extreme scarcity, perhaps even endured harsher rationing to preserve the women and children. Archaeological records do confirm periods of severe malnutrition, with skeletons showing clear signs of stunted growth and hunger-related stress. In a purely theoretical sense, famine could certainly skew survival rates, leaving more women and children while men perished in greater numbers. But here is the central, critical problem. Famine is fundamentally indiscriminate. It does not neatly or systematically target only one gender. Women and children would suffer just as much, if not often more, since infants and pregnant women are universally the most physiologically vulnerable in times of starvation. If famine were truly the root cause, we would absolutely expect to see a widespread, proportional decline across both sexes in the genetic record, not the incredibly sharp, male-selective collapse that the Y chromosome evidence reveals. That profound genetic mismatch is the primary reason why famine, as a sole cause, fails to solve this prehistoric mystery. Then there is the disease theory. Epidemics have always drastically shaped human history. The Black Death, smallpox, and influenza all left immense, civilization-altering scars. Could some unique, ancient pathogen have struck men harder than women, thereby creating the drastic gender imbalance we observe in the prehistoric record? It is not impossible. Certain modern diseases do affect the sexes differently, thanks to variations in hormones, immune system responses, and even genetic makeup. Some researchers have speculated about a prehistoric plague that specifically exploited male vulnerabilities, perhaps even linked to the Y chromosome itself. At a glance, this sounds plausible. If such a highly selective pathogen existed, it might have culled men across vast continents, leaving the women largely untouched to carry on. But again, the comprehensive evidence does not quite fit. If a disease were the culprit, the archaeological record would typically show mass graves containing only men who had died without signs of weapon trauma. We would expect to find men who died naturally, rather than the overwhelming pattern of violent, perimortem injuries that are consistently observed in the mass graves. Furthermore, a disease that caused a nearly global male die-off would have required an unbelievable degree of selectivity and virulence, leaving zero lasting genetic or pathological traces in the surviving female population, an anomaly that strained scientific credulity far more than the alternative. The final nail in the coffin for the disease and famine theories is the consistency of the genetic and archaeological match. The selective, targeted violence found at the massacre sites is the mirror image of the selective, targeted collapse of male lineages found in the DNA. Systematic warfare provides the single, coherent explanation that neatly unites both the patterns of death in the ground and the patterns of survival in our genes. Diseases tend to inflict broad, indiscriminate devastation. They sweep through entire populations, killing the old and the young, men and women almost equally. Crucially, epidemics typically leave distinct genetic signatures of resistance, traces of immunity and survival mechanisms passed down through the surviving lineages of both sexes. Yet, when scientists meticulously examine the genetic record of the prehistoric male collapse, what they find is not a pattern of random, widespread survival. They observed genetic lineages that are drastically narrowed almost exclusively through the male lines, while women's genetic diversity remains significantly more intact and robust. That precise, selective pattern looks far less like a natural plague and far more like targeted, systematic violence. Still, the idea of a catastrophic disease lingers because it introduces a haunting layer of possibility. Imagine if some specific ancient sickness did sweep through, striking men far more fatally than women, perhaps due to a unique hormonal or immune vulnerability. The survivors would have been left in a strange, dramatically lopsided world where women vastly outnumbered men. Societies would have been instantly and profoundly shifted. Alliances would need urgent reformation, and powerful myths would inevitably be born to explain why the world had suddenly tilted so violently. It's a chilling thought that speaks to the vulnerability of early humanity, even if the comprehensive evidence tilts much more strongly toward another, human-driven cause. And the role of famine, too, cannot be completely dismissed, though it operates as a trigger rather than the killer itself. Widespread hunger has always been a potent fuel for conflict. A severe scarcity of essential resources could very easily have been the initial spark that ignited the brutal tribal wars we've already traced. When key fields failed or critical animal herds grew scarce, desperate tribes would inevitably turn on one another. And in those resulting brutal struggles, men, the warriors and defenders, became the primary targets of annihilation. Therefore, while famine alone cannot account for the male genetic collapse, it played the crucial role of a catalyst, setting off the escalating conflict that ultimately finished the job. When we place famine and disease alongside the clear archaeological scars of violence, a much clearer picture emerges. Both could have been immense background pressures, weakening societies and forcing movement. But neither, by itself, explains the definitive, surgical way in which men vanished. Only warfare, with its ruthless, systematic strategy of obliterating rival bloodlines, fully and coherently matches both the genetic and the archaeological evidence. These alternative theories still matter immensely because they remind us that the prehistoric era was not a simple time. Early humans lived in a world of overlapping, perpetual crises. Hunger, sickness, and organized war were all pressing in at once. And sometimes, one disaster only served to sharpen the edge of another. So, while famine and disease were not the smoking gun, they were almost certainly part of the overwhelming storm. They weakened societies, set the stage for total desperation, and into that desperation stepped a darker, uniquely human solution: war without mercy. This was a form of conflict designed not merely to defeat enemies, but to eradicate them entirely. This means that when we consider the forgotten prehistoric war, we cannot separate it entirely from the persistent shadows of hunger and plague. They may not have been the direct killers, but they were the unwitting accomplices that made the systematic slaughter possible. Imagine for a moment you're standing within a prehistoric settlement thousands of years ago. The air hangs heavy with the familiar scent of cooking smoke. The comforting murmur of families fills the night. And yet, beneath it all, there's a profound, constant tension. A powerful neighboring tribe eyes the same crucial river valley. Another group covets your grazing land. Fear is a constant state. And then, one day, that fear becomes brutally real. Raiders charge in, weapons raised, and by the following sunrise, nearly every adult man in your community lies dead. The women and children survive, but only because they are immediately absorbed by the conquering group. This is not a single, isolated tragedy, but a repeating, devastating pattern that carved itself into the very DNA of our species. When scientists first uncovered the catastrophic collapse of male genetic diversity, the Y chromosome bottleneck, they struggled to rationalize it. Roughly between and years ago, the diversity of male lineages shrank almost to nothing, while the genetic lines of women remained stable. That dramatic contrast is the absolute key. If either disease or widespread famine had been the cause, both men and women would have been affected equally and indiscriminately. Epidemics do not choose their victims by sex. Starvation cares not whether you carry a Y chromosome. But the genetic record definitively shows that it was men who vanished while women successfully continued to pass on their genes. This is precisely why systematic warfare emerges as the single most convincing explanation. In many early societies, inheritance, identity, and social power flowed exclusively through the male line. That made men both the essential carriers of the clan's identity and the primary, targeted casualties in conflict. When one tribe attacked another, the strategic killing of the men was far more than just eliminating enemy fighters. It was erasing the rival's future. Women, on the other hand, were predictably absorbed into the victors' clans, ensuring that their children would carry only the conqueror's bloodlines. Over immense periods of time, this specific practice didn't just decide isolated battles. It fundamentally reshaped humanity's entire genetic map. Archaeology staunchly supports this grim narrative. Across Neolithic Europe, for instance, mass graves have been repeatedly unearthed containing predominantly male skeletons. Their entire communities of males were systematically wiped out, while the notable absence of women strongly hints at their forced absorption. One striking example is the massacre site at Schöneck-Kilienstatten in Germany, where dozens of men were executed and buried together. Their injuries tell the unmistakable story of systematic slaughter, not random chaos. Other sites across Asia and the Americas echo this same brutal rhythm, reinforcing the idea that intergroup warfare was not occasional. It was a relentless, existential condition. Think back to the competition between patrilineal clans. As populations grew and agricultural practices spread, land became exponentially more valuable, and so did the control over women and the resulting offspring. Clans capable of eliminating their male rivals didn't just win essential resources, they forcefully rewrote the genetic future. This perfectly explains why modern male lineages cluster around just a tiny handful of ancient ancestors. It was not chance or accident. It was the brutal result of repeated, zero-sum conquests where victorious clans ensured their Y chromosome spread while all others were permanently extinguished. Now, some have argued for the alternative theories we've already discussed. Could a natural disaster like famine have selectively targeted men who performed the hardest labor? Could a disease have exploited some unknown genetic weakness specifically linked to the Y chromosome? These ideas have been rigorously tested, but they consistently fail to explain the global scale and the stunning genetic precision of the collapse. If only men had been uniquely vulnerable to a specific pathogen, we would expect to see similar genetic bottlenecks in other social species, but we do not. If famine were the sole cause, the genetic record of women would show the same dramatic, narrow collapse, but it does not. Again and again, the compelling weight of evidence points back to one conclusion: something uniquely human, organized violence. And here's where the story turns truly unsettling. Warfare is not some recent invention of large kingdoms or empires. It is as old as humanity itself. The prehistoric war that killed of men wasn't a single battle or even one long campaign. It was wave after wave of raids, massacres, and exterminations, so widespread and relentlessly persistent that it left an indelible imprint on the human genome. Modern populations still carry the echoes of those few victorious male lines that survived the bottleneck and expanded outward. This catastrophic event also explains why aggression and organized conflict became so deeply rooted in subsequent human societies. When warfare ultimately decided which clans would live on, it wasn't just physical survival. It was a powerful act of genetic selection. The men who remained and multiplied were the direct descendants of warriors who fought, killed, and decisively conquered. In a very real sense, violence fundamentally shaped the genetic heritage of modern humanity. So, why does warfare remain the strongest explanation? Because it aligns perfectly with the evidence on every level: genetic, archaeological, and historical. The dramatic collapse of male diversity, the mass graves filled with slaughtered men, the persistence of women's intact lineages, the rise of powerful, dominant clans whose blood still flows through us today. All of these facts point to one conclusion. It was not nature that nearly erased the men of prehistory. It was us. And the most haunting part of all is that this war is essentially forgotten, unrecorded in formal myths or chronicles, yet it is profoundly etched into our DNA. Every man alive today is a descendant of the ruthless survivors of that ancient battlefield. The victors' Y chromosomes became the foundation of our present, while the vanquished were erased forever. And that is why, above all else, warfare remains the clearest and strongest explanation for the prehistoric conflict that killed of all men. Imagine walking into a village thousands of years ago, but instead of the typical balance of men and women, you find something unnerving. Men are profoundly scarce. So scarce, in fact, that their presence feels almost mythical. The cooking fires are tended mostly by women. The fields are worked by women. The children are raised by women. The very structure of the community has bent and adapted around this devastating imbalance. This wasn't just any period of history. This was the immediate aftermath of the forgotten prehistoric war that killed of all men. The sudden, massive disappearance of males left a deep scar that fundamentally reshaped every aspect of life: social roles, kinship systems, inheritance, and even the dynamics of power itself. In most societies before this collapse, men were absolutely central to clan identity. Their Y chromosomes defined the patrilineal groups, the rigid lines of descent that determined who belonged and who did not. But when those men abruptly vanished, the essential continuity of the tribes was forced to be carried by the women. Women became not merely caregivers, but essential political assets, the critical bridges between the few surviving clans, and sometimes a deciding factor in whether a group endured or perished. Consider the powerful ripple effects of that scarcity. For one, marriage and reproduction dynamics shifted drastically. With so few men available, the reproductive pressure on them skyrocketed. They were not only expected to fight and defend their tribes, but also to father as many children as possible to urgently rebuild the population numbers. Meanwhile, women outnumbered men by such a staggering margin that many may never have had permanent, lifelong partners. Instead, they may have been shared across kin groups or quickly absorbed into rival tribes following conquest, as we already saw. This extreme imbalance could easily explain why certain, unusual social customs emerged. While polyandry, one woman with multiple husbands, existed in some cultures, the far more necessary practice would have been polygyny, one man with multiple wives, becoming widespread out of sheer demographic necessity. The crippling shortage of men compelled the surviving tribes to maximize the reproductive potential of the few who remained. It was a cold equation. Now, let's examine inheritance. Before the catastrophe, many clans were strictly patrilineal, passing land, essential tools, and authority from father to son. But with so few men left, that rigid system was forced to adapt radically. Women's roles and inheritance became profoundly more significant. Kinship may have temporarily shifted toward maternal lines, matrilineal, where property and social identity were tied to mothers and their female relatives instead of the vanished fathers. This wasn't a small adjustment. It was a cultural and social earthquake that completely redefined how families and tribes organized themselves, leaving faint echoes in later societies where maternal lineage carried significant weight. Of course, extreme scarcity also meant a massive concentration of power. The few surviving men held enormous, amplified influence. Imagine a single male in a small tribe, surrounded by a large number of women who depended on him not just for children, but for physical protection and access to the necessary resources. His authority could grow almost unchecked, giving rise to the early, dominant forms of male-led hierarchies. Yet, simultaneously, women themselves wielded a greater, practical power than before. With men frequently absent or gone, women were the ones who led the daily community, managed resources, and ensured the survival of the next generation. It was a true paradox. Women became more central to the tribe's functioning, yet the surviving men became more dominant and authoritative. We can see powerful hints of this paradox in global myths and legends. Many ancient cultures tell stories of immense floods, devastating wars, or fierce plagues that nearly wiped out humanity, often leaving women as the primary, resilient survivors who carried life forward. These myths may not be literal accounts, but they perfectly echo the core truth of what happened. The prehistoric collapse was not just a biological crisis. It was a fundamental cultural reset. And consider the profound, long-term consequences. The intense survival pressure created by extreme male scarcity may have significantly intensified human aggression in the generations that followed. Tribes fought even harder for their very existence, and the control of women became directly linked to the ability to control the future. This could be one key reason why later human societies developed such strict and rigid rules around marriage, kinship, and gender roles. The deep, traumatic memory of male scarcity lingered, shaping how we viewed power and reproduction for millennia. The movement of women between groups, being absorbed into the conquering tribes, connects directly here. When men were scarce, women were simultaneously the prize of war and the glue that held disparate groups together. Their movement across tribal lines wasn't just about personal survival. It redrew the social map of humanity. The children they bore bound groups together in complicated, necessary webs, sometimes dissolving old rivalries, but often creating complex new ones. So, how did male scarcity reshape prehistoric societies? It altered everything: marriage systems, inheritance rules, power dynamics, and the deep roots of culture. It forced humanity to rebuild itself in a profoundly new form, one where survival was precariously balanced on the fragile thread of a few surviving men and the astonishing resilience of countless women. In the end, the world that rose from that catastrophic collapse was fundamentally different from the one before. And though the surviving men were few, the women ensured that the human story continued. Without their survival, that forgotten war might have ended our story altogether. Imagine a world suddenly emptied of nearly all its men. Fathers, brothers, sons, gone in numbers so vast that only a tiny sliver of male bloodline survived. The forgotten prehistoric war didn't just take lives. It brutally rewired the very fabric of family and society. When of men were erased, kinship and inheritance, the invisible threads tying people together, were forced to shift in ways humanity had never before conceived. Before the collapse, power and lineage typically passed down the father's line. Clans were rigidly patrilineal, with names, crucial tools, and essential hunting rights all legally tied to the men. A son inherited his father's defined role, his status, and his bloodline. But when nearly every male bloodline was cut short, that entire, rigid structure cracked wide open. Suddenly, women became the living, indispensable bridges between the scattered surviving fragments of the old tribes. Conquerors who absorbed women from defeated groups weren't just taking wives. They were taking direct access to future generations. Kinship stopped being a neat, predictable father-to-son chain and instead became a complex, tangled web that forcefully fused old families into new ones. From the perspective of a surviving clan, this made perfect sense. After the battle, the rival men were eliminated, but the women remained. By taking them in, the victors could vastly expand their own bloodline while simultaneously extinguishing the identity of the conquered. Over generations, this action fundamentally shifted the meaning of inheritance itself. The Y chromosome, carried only by the few surviving men, became scarce, invaluable, and a symbol of dominance. Women's connections, who they bore children for, which clan they were absorbed into, became the single most crucial factor in determining whose lineage would ultimately endure. Archaeological evidence shows hints of this dramatic shift in burial sites. In earlier periods, men were buried with weapons and clear symbols of authority, their graves serving as testaments to male lineage and dominance. But after the collapse, evidence suggests that women held far more visible importance. Some female burials from this period show them interred with wealth and crucial artifacts once typically reserved for male leaders. It is as if the balance of symbolic power tilted, reflecting the new social reality that women were now the essential vessels through which clans could guarantee their preservation. Genetics tells the exact same story. While the diversity of male Y chromosomes collapsed drastically, female mitochondrial DNA, inherited solely from mothers, remained rich and varied. This means women from a vast array of clans survived, even if their male relatives did not. Their survival carried their essential culture, practical skills, and memory directly into the victorious tribes. This was far more than mere biology. It was a powerful cultural shift. Kinship was no longer solely about the father's name. It became a mosaic built upon women's resilience and men's scarcity. Imagine being a child born in this new world. If your father's clan had triumphed, you might grow up surrounded by women who had originated from defeated tribes, speaking different dialects and telling stories of places you would never see. Yet, you would carry your father's name, his dominant lineage stamped onto your identity, even as your mother's deep heritage blended into the background. That blending process fundamentally reshaped entire societies, forging new, composite identities from the ashes of old ones. Inheritance also shifted in profound material ways. With fewer men to pass things down, control of vital tools, fertile land, or essential livestock became heavily concentrated in the hands of the surviving, victorious clans. Power was no longer distributed across many fathers and sons. It was dangerously narrowed, ruthlessly consolidated, and fiercely guarded by a dominant few. This extreme concentration of inheritance set the foundational stage for the hierarchies that would later harden into the chieftains and kingdoms of recorded history. The war didn't just reduce men's numbers. It massively amplified the authority of the few who remained. And here is the haunting, long-term part. Echoes of these ancient power shifts still ripple through our modern world. The entrenched idea that names, property, or power should inherently pass through the male line is a deep cultural memory of that ancient bottleneck. A time when inheritance itself had to be violently rebuilt following the near erasure of men. Even today, surnames and traditional patriarchal customs carry the faint, indelible shadow of that prehistoric moment when humanity was forced to reinvent kinship from scratch. Therefore, the Forgotten War was not only about destruction, it was also about profound transformation. With men gone in staggering numbers, women became the indispensable threads stitching society back together. Inheritance stopped being a steady flow through countless fathers and was instead funneled into the hands of a tiny, surviving few. That transformation reshaped not only who survived, but also how humanity learned to organize itself afterward. And the changes didn't stop there. The war didn't just bend inheritance. It carved deep scars into culture, stories, and myths. The memory of those tectonic shifts lingered, retold across generations, morphing into legends of great wars and lost men. Those myths are the next echo of the forgotten prehistoric war, and they still whisper to us today. Have you ever truly wondered why so many of humanity's oldest, most enduring stories are so filled with endless, apocalyptic wars? Idols clashing, brothers killing brothers, and entire clans being wiped from the face of the earth. It's often tempting to dismiss these tales as mere metaphors, grand exaggerations designed to entertain around the tribal fire. But what if they were something much more profound? What if they were echoes, dim, distorted, yet powerful memories of something undeniably real, something so massive and terrible that it permanently burned itself into the collective memory of our species? The forgotten prehistoric war that killed of all men may not have survived in neat written records, but its shadow might still linger in the foundational myths from every corner of the globe. Consider the story of Cain and Abel, one of the oldest narratives in the Judeo-Christian tradition. Two brothers, one kills the other, and blood cries out from the ground. It is fundamentally a parable of jealousy, but on a deeper level, it perfectly mirrors a world where men's lives were exceptionally fragile, easily and swiftly taken in escalating cycles of violence. Now look beyond that single story. You find strikingly similar echoes across countless cultures. The Mahabharata in India is filled with epic, cataclysmic wars that virtually devastate entire clans. The Norse sagas describe men slaughtering one another until only a few remain following the twilight of Ragnarok. Even the classic Greek tales of the Trojan War show men falling in overwhelming numbers while women are carried away as the spoils of conquest. What ties these seemingly disparate myths together is not just the theme of war, but the near total destruction of male lineages. Again and again, the stories conclude with the men dead and the women assimilated into the victor's side. Doesn't that sound eerily similar to what genetic and archaeological evidence tells us happened thousands of years ago? A world where conquering tribes selectively killed rival men but spared the women, weaving them into new families and passing on their own Y chromosomes while erasing others forever. Of course, myths are living things. They evolve, mixing powerful symbolism with fragmented memories of truth. But consider the powerful mechanism of trauma and memory. Imagine you were a child in a tribe where nearly all the men were wiped out by a rival group. You grow up hearing that traumatic story, and you pass it on to your own children, who pass it to theirs. Over generations, the specific details blur. Monsters and fantastical heroes take the place of real, mortal warriors. But the core narrative remains. Men destroyed in overwhelming wars. Women taken. Survival hanging by the thinnest thread. That kind of immense, societal trauma doesn't simply vanish. It mutates into myth. Even flood myths, found across many civilizations, may hold distant echoes of this forgotten lore. Floods in these stories often symbolize a divine cleansing, a washing away of nearly everyone, leaving only a small, righteous remnant to repopulate the world. Isn't that, in a conceptual way, exactly what the Y chromosome bottleneck shows us? A near extinction of men, followed by a handful of survivors whose few bloodlines became the genetic foundation of all future generations. The flood may not have been water at all. It may have been successive waves of total war. Archaeology shows us bones and broken weapons. Genetics shows us the collapse of male diversity. But myths show us the psychological scar, the urgent, repeated attempt of early societies to make sense of an unthinkable global loss. Why did the gods demand so much blood? Why were men's lives so fragile? Why did the women live on while entire lines of fathers and sons vanished? Myths gave meaning to these profound questions, even if the answers were clothed in symbols and religious allegory. And consider this final point. The persistence of the male warrior myth across countless cultures may itself be a direct product of that ancient trauma. When men die in conflict, what is the single, most critical lesson the few survivors pass down? That men must always be strong, always fight, always be ready to defend or conquer. The ubiquitous glorification of the warrior, the endless cycle of vengeance and legend. Perhaps these are not merely cultural choices, but genetic and cultural inheritances from a time when weakness literally meant total extinction. Remember when we looked at the evidence, archaeology versus genetics. Both gave us physical clues, but myths give us something different, an emotional echo, a human voice. The stories may not be literal historical records, but they preserve the raw memory of violence, devastating loss, and eventual survival. When you line them up side by side across continents and centuries, the pattern is impossible to ignore. They all seem to remember a terrible world where men fought and died in overwhelming numbers, while women carried on the future. The memory of those shifts lingered, becoming the powerful legends that still whisper to us today. Close your eyes and try to picture the scene one last time. A small campfire glowing under a vast prehistoric sky. Warriors are sharpening their spears. Children huddle close to their mothers, and the surrounding silence hides the deep memory of battles fought only days before. In that ancient world, aggression wasn't just a fleeting impulse. It was a fundamental mechanism for survival. But here's the truly unsettling question. When men were wiped out in the forgotten prehistoric war, what did that mass culling do to the fundamental way that humans, particularly men, fight, compete, and even think about violence? The potent echoes of that ancient bloodshed might still be shaping our behavior today. Let's begin with the obvious. The war was not simply about killing men. It was, as we have established, about the systematic elimination of rival male bloodlines. That kind of violence wasn't random or chaotic. It was intentional, systematic, and strategically ruthless. When such a clear, winning pattern repeats itself across hundreds of generations, it doesn't just change who survives. It actively molds the behavior of the survivors. The clans that successfully thrived and expanded were those whose men were not only fierce in battle, but were also ruthless enough to annihilate their competitors down to the last son. Over time, the traits linked to aggression, territorial dominance, boldness, and an unquestioning willingness to fight became deeply and genetically embedded within the surviving male lines. It was, in effect, evolution by brutality. Remember how we discussed women being absorbed into the conquering tribes? That practice was not only biology, it was a powerful force for cultural transmission. Those women carried their personal stories, their survival fears, and their cultural acceptance that reinforced the necessary dominance of the aggressive, victorious clans. Children born into those new societies grew up in environments where aggression wasn't just tolerated, it was actively celebrated as the key to existence. A son who hesitated in battle risked the total extinction of his entire lineage. A son who fought mercilessly ensured his clan's survival and expansion. The war left behind a world where aggression was genetically and culturally rewarded and woven into both the bloodline and the societal ethos. And this profound influence did not magically vanish when the most intense fighting subsided. Think about the way human societies continued to organize themselves long after the prehistoric wars. Patriarchal systems, inheritance through male lines, and established warrior elites, they all perfectly echo the ruthless logic of those ancient struggles. Violence became permanently tied to power, kinship, and social status. The clans that rose to dominance passed down not just their DNA, but their specific worldview, one where force decided fate. But aggression didn't manifest only on the battlefield. It also became a structural part of how men interacted within their own groups. Fierce competition for dominance, intense rivalries for leadership, and constant, necessary displays of strength. All of these competitive behaviors can be traced back to a time when proving yourself wasn't about mere pride. It was about survival. If your clan hesitated, another would wipe you out. That immense pressure effectively baked aggression into the very core of male identity that was passed down. Still, it's not all darkness. Humans are adaptable. They also developed essential mechanisms to manage and contain this aggression, because constant, internal conflict is ultimately self-destructive. Rituals, alliances, and cultural norms emerge to channel violence into controlled, external forms. Think of competitive games, formalized warrior rituals, or even storytelling traditions that glorified heroes but warned against recklessness. These were necessary ways of keeping the fire of aggression alive as a defense mechanism, without allowing it to burn the entire world down. Even later myths, stories of great wars, and terrifying idols of thunder and battle carry the faint, cautionary echoes of the prehistoric war. They serve as a constant reminder that aggression had become both a terrible danger and a necessary virtue. Modern science gives us another crucial lens to view this enduring legacy. Studies of human behavior consistently show that men are, on average, more prone to risk-taking, intergroup competition, and physical aggression than women. These differences aren't absolute or universal, but they are remarkably consistent across diverse cultures. While complex, these observed behavioral differences could represent the long-term genetic and cultural inheritance of that prehistoric selective pressure. The men who survived the bottleneck were the descendants of the most successful aggressors. That inheritance still sits, subtle but powerful, within our nature today. And when geneticists trace male lineages, they don't just see a family tree. They see the deep, definitive scars of that bottleneck. This is powerful proof that, in many cases, only the Y chromosomes of the most aggressive, most successful conquering clan survived. It forcefully suggests that the long-term impact of the prehistoric war was not merely a cultural shift. It was a profound, species-altering biological selection event. The genetic inheritance of modern men is, in a very real sense, the victory banner of ruthless ancient warfare. Have you ever truly stopped to wonder why so many of humanity's oldest, most sacred stories are absolutely saturated with the theme of endless, overwhelming wars? Idols clash violently, brothers kill brothers, and entire tribes are often wiped entirely from the face of the earth. It is instinctive to assume these ancient tales were just imaginative metaphors, grand exaggerations spun to entertain and worn around the communal fire. But what if there's something far more substantial? What if they are, in fact, echoes? Faint, distorted, yet powerfully persistent memories of something undeniably real. Something so massive and terrible that it permanently burned itself into the deep, collective memory of our species. The forgotten prehistoric war that killed of all men never survived in any formal written records, but its looming shadow might still cling fiercely to the foundational myths from every corner of the world. Take the narrative of Cain and Abel, one of the deepest, oldest tales in the Judeo-Christian tradition. Two brothers, one kills the other, and the victim's blood cries out from the ground. While it functions as a powerful parable of jealousy and sin, on a much deeper, structural level, it perfectly mirrors a world where men's lives were acutely fragile, easily and swiftly taken in escalating cycles of zero-sum violence. Now, pull back from that single story, and you discover similar, profound echoes across numerous cultures. The vast epic of the Mahabharata in India is filled with epic, cataclysmic wars that virtually devastate entire clans and societies. The bleak Norse sagas describe men slaughtering one another until only a small, determined few survive the final twilight of Ragnarok. Even the classic Greek tales of the Trojan War describe men falling in overwhelming, senseless numbers while the women, the objects of the conflict, are carried away as prizes and breeding stock. What fundamentally ties these seemingly disparate myths together is not just the universal theme of war, but the shocking motif of the near-total destruction of male lineages. Again and again, the narrative concludes with the men dead and the women absorbed into the victor's side. Doesn't that pattern sound uncannily similar to what genetics and archaeology tell us happened years ago? A violent world where conquering tribes systematically killed rival men, but strategically spared the women, weaving them into their new families and passing on only their own Y chromosomes, thereby erasing all others forever. Of course, myths are not static. They evolve, mixing profound symbolism with fragmented, traumatic memories. But reflect on the powerful persistence of human memory. Imagine being a child in a tribe where nearly all the adult men were suddenly and violently wiped out by a rival group. You grow up haunted by that story of extinction, and you instinctively pass it on to your children, who pass it to theirs. Over successive generations, the specific, painful details blur and soften. Idols, monsters, and divine judgment take the place of real, mortal warriors, but the core remains fixed. Men destroyed in terrible wars, women captured and taken, survival hanging by a desperate thread. That kind of immense, societal trauma does not simply disappear. It mutates into powerful, enduring myth. Even the numerous global flood myths, may hold distant, symbolic echoes of this forgotten war. Floods in these stories often serve to symbolize a total cleansing, a washing away of nearly everyone, leaving only a small, essential remnant to repopulate the world. Is that not, in a conceptual way, exactly what the Y chromosome bottleneck reveals? A near extinction of the male population, followed by a handful of successful survivors whose bloodlines became the genetic foundation of all future generations. The flood may not have been water at all. It may have been successive, devastating waves of total war. Archaeology provides us with the tangible bones and the broken weapons. Genetics shows us the undeniable global collapse of male diversity. But myths provide us with the psychological scar, the desperate, universal attempt of early societies to make sense of unthinkable, species-altering loss. Why did the gods, or the forces of nature, demand so much blood? Why were men's lives so fragile? Why did women live on while entire lines of fathers and sons vanished? Myths gave a necessary structure and meaning to these existential questions, even if the answers were cloaked in religious symbols. And consider this final, crucial point. The relentless persistence of the male warrior myth across virtually all human cultures may itself be a direct, cultural product of that ancient trauma. When of men perish in conflict, what is the single, most critical lesson the few survivors are compelled to pass down? That men must always be strong, always fight, and always be ready to defend or conquer. The ubiquitous glorification of the warrior, the complex, endless cycle of vengeance and legend. Perhaps these are not merely cultural or artistic choices, but profound, inherited survival strategies from a time when even a moment of weakness meant total extinction. Remember the convergence of archaeology and genetics. Both gave us physical, quantifiable clues, but myths give us something different, an emotional echo, a human voice. The stories may not be literal records, but they powerfully preserve the memory of violence, loss, and ultimate survival. When you align them side by side across continents and centuries, the pattern is impossible to ignore. They all seem to remember a world where men fought and died in overwhelming, selective numbers, while the women carried on the future. The memory of these profound shifts lingered, becoming the powerful legends that still whisper to us today. If you look around today, at crowded city centers, quiet agricultural villages, or even the faces of strangers passing by, you might conclude that human diversity is effectively boundless. Different languages, radically different cultures, diverse skin tones, and myriad traditions make us appear like a beautiful, chaotic patchwork quilt of history. But buried deep inside the DNA of every living man, specifically within the Y chromosome, there is a hidden, profound sameness that quietly whispers of a violent, shared past. Modern genetic evidence provides the definitive, living proof that nearly all living men ultimately trace their ancestry back to just a handful of successful male ancestors who survived the forgotten prehistoric war that violently wiped out of all others. Here is the scientific mechanism behind this finding. Geneticists study the Y chromosome because it passes almost entirely unchanged from father to son. Over generations, mutations build up slowly and predictably, acting like precise genetic timestamps. When scientists first compared the Y chromosomes of men from across the globe, they expected to find a wide, diverse range of Y lineages, matching the rich diversity seen in women's mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA. Instead, they found the exact opposite. Male lineages collapsed dramatically around 1 year ago, leaving behind only a few surviving, dominant branches. Those few lineages then exploded outward, rapidly fathering billions of descendants across continents. The power of these dominant lines is staggering. For example, today, a significant percentage of men in Asia carry Y chromosomes that trace back to a single man who lived only about 1,000 years ago, a legacy often attributed to Genghis Khan and his massive, conquering family. In Ireland, one ancient male line associated with a powerful clan still genetically dominates large swaths of the population. These are not isolated flukes or random chance. They are powerful echoes of an older, much larger pattern. A global genetic scar left by prehistoric wars where conquering groups systematically exterminated rival men, but strategically absorbed their women. Remember our findings about mass killings and intergroup conflicts? Modern genetics makes those ancient stories vividly real. The pronounced lack of diversity in men's DNA proves that those killings weren't rare, regional events. They were widespread, systematic, and relentless. Archaeology uncovers the specific bones and tools, but genetics shows us the global scale of the human cost. Billions of men alive today carry the legacy of just a few victorious lineages, while the vast majority of prehistoric men vanished without leaving a trace in the gene pool. This genetic finding is also the ultimate reason why warfare remains the strongest explanation. If famine or disease had been the global cause, we would absolutely see the same dramatic collapse in women's genetic diversity. But we don't. Women's mitochondrial DNA is rich and varied, conclusively proving their lines were preserved and continued during the male bottleneck. It was men who were selectively and systematically removed, their specific genes extinguished, while women became integral parts of the tribes that conquered. Think about the human implications. Every man alive today is the product of a decisive act of survival, not just of his ancestors, but of the specific clans that won those relentless wars. And every woman alive carries a genetic mix from both the victors and the vanquished, because women moved between tribes as essential prizes of conquest, blending bloodlines. Our modern genomes are a living, tangible record of both prehistoric brutality and incredible human resilience. Modern genetic evidence also vividly demonstrates how quickly genetic dominance can spread when unchecked. A single successful, powerful male, under the right conditions of conquest and societal collapse, could reshape entire populations in just a few centuries. We see this with the Genghisid lineage. But the identical process was occurring thousands of years earlier on a much larger, bloodier scale. That is why when scientists model genetic diversity, they can pinpoint that sudden collapse in the Y chromosome. It is not a gradual decline. It is a sharp, violent, and sudden drop. It is the unmistakable genetic signature of human conflict and extermination. And here is the most eerie conclusion. You don't need ancient DNA to see it. Every living man carries the proof inside his own cells. The Y chromosome is like a ghost of prehistory, faithfully repeating the same story with every scientific test. It tells us that men today are brothers many times over, all descended from only a tiny handful of dominant fathers who made it through the violent storm. This powerful genetic evidence compels us to fundamentally rethink how human societies developed. The extreme scarcity of surviving male lines meant that power and authority concentrated quickly and brutally. The victorious clans held crushing dominance over inheritance, resources, and identity, shaping subsequent cultures in ways that still echo. Even the foundational myths of heroic patriarchs and founding fathers may be distorted, glorious memories of those few who survived when nearly all others were killed. So, The next time you hear that human beings are incredibly diverse, remember the hidden genetic truth. Yes, we are diverse on the surface, but deep in male DNA lies a bottleneck so sharp it nearly erased men from history. The very fact that we are here at all is because a handful of ruthless survivors fathered the world we know. Modern genetics doesn't just confirm the forgotten prehistoric war. It shows us that every man walking the earth today is a living monument to that ancient violence. And whether we realize it or not, we still carry the silence of the men who never made it through. Close your eyes for a moment and truly imagine this. A time before cities, before writing, before history itself. The world is raw, filled with small, isolated tribes scattered across vast forests and plains. Life is harsh but balanced, until suddenly, something happens that nearly erases men from existence. Of them vanish, leaving behind a puzzle so deep that even today, with all our advanced science, we cannot fully explain it. This is the enduring mystery of the prehistoric male war. The evidence for this event doesn't come from stories written on stone or ancient scrolls, because none exist from that time. Instead, it comes directly from our blood. Modern genetics clearly shows a catastrophic collapse in Y chromosome diversity about years ago. Almost every single male line disappeared, leaving only a handful to carry humanity forward. That is fundamentally not normal, and it is profoundly not random. Something powerful, violent, and targeted enough to all but erase men happened. The strongest, most coherent theory is warfare. We've established how patrilineal clans fiercely competed, how conquering tribes systematically absorbed women, and how rival men were utterly wiped out. Piece by piece, the dark story emerges, escalating zero-sum conflicts where victorious men exterminated defeated ones and took their women into their ranks. Over successive generations, this ruthless, selective cycle eliminated nearly every male lineage. It perfectly explains why women's genetic diversity remained wide, while men's collapsed to a tiny fraction. Yet, crucial questions still linger. Why did this war erupt on such a massive, global scale? Was it ultimately triggered by dramatic climate change, a widespread famine that pushed tribes into conflict, or perhaps a new, more lethal technology, better weapons, that suddenly tilted the balance toward extermination rather than simple coexistence? Archaeology provides us with clear signs of violence in prehistoric burials. Skeletons marked by blunt force or arrows. Entire groups buried together as if instantly slaughtered. Yet, conclusively linking those scattered bones to the uniform, global genetic collapse remains a complex challenge, like trying to match pieces of a puzzle with most of the connecting pieces missing. There are alternative theories, of course. Some suggest an ancient disease that disproportionately affected men. Others imagine social structures changing so drastically that only a few elite male lines were allowed to reproduce. But none of these fit the evidence quite as neatly as systematic warfare. A plague wouldn't spare women's genetic diversity. Social restrictions wouldn't happen simultaneously and universally across so many regions. Warfare, with its strategic, targeted killing of men and the necessary absorption of women, still stands as the most compelling and comprehensive explanation. And yet, the mystery endures because if warfare explains the how, it doesn't fully answer the ultimate why. What drove humans to the very edge of self-destruction? Was it sheer, desperate competition for land and resources? Or was it something deeper within our nature, a rising tide of aggression and dominance that simply could not be stopped? The truth is, the full details may forever remain lost. The prehistoric male war leaves behind no comprehensive chronicles, no epic poems, no ruins of great empires. Its only true record is genetic, and genetics can only whisper so much. What makes this mystery even more haunting is how dramatically it shaped the world we live in now. The men alive today descend from a shockingly small pool of ancestors. In a profound way, we are all much closer cousins because of that collapse. Our modern social systems, patrilineal clans, inheritance rules, historical control of women, all likely trace their roots back to the violent aftershocks of that single war. Even our myths of great floods or near-apocalyptic battles are cultural echoes of this forgotten, terrifying age. Think about the legacy. When nearly every man disappeared, society had to be totally remade. Women carried the continuity of culture and memory. Children quickly tied the surviving tribes together, and the few dominant male lines expanded to rule the new world. The war ended, but its consequences never truly left us. Every time we observe the imbalance of power, the history of aggression, or the enduring myths of ancient wars, we might be seeing faint shadows of that prehistoric catastrophe. And maybe that is the strangest part of all. For something so devastating, so profoundly world-altering, it left no clear, definitive story behind. It remains hidden, like a deep, indelible scar beneath the skin of humanity, felt but not fully seen. We can piece together the clues. We can imagine the battles, the victories, and the crushing losses. But the full truth may forever remain slightly out of reach. The enduring mystery of the prehistoric male war isn't just about a forgotten past. It's about us. It forces us to ask whether violence and conquest are fundamentally written into our DNA, and whether the survival of humanity came at the terrible cost of unimaginable bloodshed. And while the men who fought and died in that war are long forgotten, their absence still fundamentally shapes who we are.
Before we start, do me a favor and hit that like button. We're aiming for 50,000 likes on this video, and your support by subscribing to this channel is the best way to make that happen. Now, let's get right into the heart of the matter. Tonight we're setting sail into the grimy, chaotic, and absolutely miserable world of historical pirates. And fair warning, you probably won't survive this. You might be picturing wild adventures, glittering treasure chests, and a talking parrot on your shoulder. But the truth, it's darker, smellier, and filled with more screaming than you signed up for. It starts with a mistake, or bad luck, or maybe just being in the wrong place when the wrong ship docks. You're probably a sailor already, working merchant routes or hauling cargo through the Caribbean. Life isn't good, but at least you've got a rhythm. But then a shadow appears on the horizon, a black flag, or maybe just a ship that looks like it's barely holding together but still moves like it's possessed. You don't get a chance to panic before cannon fire slams into your hull. Splinters fly like razors, tearing the air. Your captain's shrill screams turn into a gurgling silence, and then they board. Pirates aren't gentle. They scream curses, wave rusty cutlasses, and fire pistols that smell like burning metal and gunpowder. The deck beneath your feet is slick with seawater, oil, and a dizzying wave of fear turns your guts to ice. One pirate, his face scarred and grimed by old powder, laughs so hard his eye patch slips, revealing a bloodshot, milky orb. You don't fight back. Most don't. You drop your knife, raise your hands, and hope. Maybe they'll let you live. Maybe you'll get lucky. But lucky means something different out here. The luckiest get press-ganged, dragged onto the pirate ship, shoved below decks, and told by their new master, "Now say goodbye to your old life." You've just been forcibly recruited into one of the most brutal jobs on Earth. They strip you of your clothes. Those belong to the pirates now. You're handed a crusty shirt, some pants that barely fit, and a pair of boots that squish when you walk. You're now part of the crew, which mostly means scrubbing decks, taking orders, and never questioning the guy with the biggest hat. Some men beg to join, hoping for gold and freedom. You didn't get that choice. You're still shaking from the attack when someone smacks you on the back and calls you green meat. It's not a compliment. Your first night aboard is miserable. The ship rocks endlessly like it's trying to fling you into the sea. You sleep on a damp board in a room that smells like stale tobacco, cheap gin, and the metallic tang of dried blood. Someone near you is snoring so loud you think they might be dying. You're hungry, but you can't find the kitchen because there isn't one. Just a guy called Cookie. Cookie, a mountain of a man with a perpetual film of grease on his hands, stirring a cauldron that seemed to bubble with regret. The ladle he used was dented and black, and the random animal bits he boiled included what you swear was the head of a sea bird, still watching you with a tiny, glazed eye. The smell wasn't just mold, it was the smell of every forgotten ambition and every lost ship. You're starting to realize this isn't an adventure. It's a trap. Historically, many pirates were forced into service this way, pressed into piracy after their ship was taken. A famous example is Captain Kidd's crew, many of whom claimed they were forced to join. Once aboard, refusing to participate wasn't much of an option. Saying no often meant being tossed overboard, or worse, and there was no polite resignation letter. The pirate life was for life, or until something sharper ended it. The pirate ship has its own rules, of course. Once you're officially in, you're expected to pull your weight or else. There's no room for slackers or complainers. That one guy who moans too much? His punishment isn't a whipping. He's tied to the main yardarm, blindfolded, and left to sway above the hostile waters for a day. Decisions were often made democratically. The captain could be voted out. It's like the worst job ever combined with bizarre workplace equity. Except your coworkers smell like dead fish and solve disputes with daggers. But don't get too hopeful. That share they promised you? It comes with a catch. You don't get anything until the next successful raid. And no one's promising when that will be. For now, you're just a body helping the ship limp through hostile waters. And trust me, those waters are full of things that want to kill you. Hurricanes, naval ships, other pirates. Even your own ship seems determined to fall apart beneath your feet. There's a saying aboard, the sea takes what it wants. The guy who teaches it to you is missing 2 fingers and has a tooth that whistles when he talks. You ask what happened to his fingers. Bad captain, he says, and leaves it at that. Not everything about pirate recruitment is completely agreed upon. Historians still debate just how common press ganging was. Some believe most pirates joined voluntarily, driven by desperation or enticed by the promise of freedom and loot. Others argue it was more often coercion, especially in the golden age of piracy, when men had fewer options and navies treated their crews like livestock. But in your case, voluntary, it was not. You spend your days mopping, climbing, hauling ropes, and pretending you're not crying. You're hungry all the time. Someone coughs blood near your hammock. The ship rocks endlessly, and you start to dream of dry land. Not even a beach. Just solid ground that doesn't sway like a drunk man. You catch yourself staring at the horizon, wondering what would happen if you just jumped. It's a dangerous thought, but it won't be your last because this is just the beginning. You're officially a pirate now. And if you think it's going to get better from here, oh, You sweet, naive little landlubber. There's a moment, maybe a few days in, where it finally hits you. You're never going home. Not really. Not to your town, your family, your bed with an actual mattress. That's gone. Whatever vague notion of escape you had is evaporating fast. You're miles from any coast, surrounded by criminals and living in a drifting coffin. The pirate ship is your new universe now, and everything you once knew is as distant as the moon. The thing is, you hadn't realized just how attached you were to land. You missed the weirdest stuff like walking in a straight line. Grass, birds that don't screech, the taste of fresh bread, even the sound of distant church bells, the sort of thing you used to ignore, now haunts your memory like a lullaby you can't hum right anymore. The ship rocks constantly, and your legs never quite adjust. You stumble into walls, trip over ropes, and at least once a day, you swear the floor is moving just to mess with you. Spoiler, it is. You find out quickly that privacy is a myth. Everyone's packed together below deck, breathing the same sour air. Sleeping shoulder to shoulder on creaky boards or hammocks that reek of mildew. Conversations are always happening. Arguments, groans, muttered threats, dreams yelled in sleep. You've never heard so much snoring in your life. In the air, it smells like sour meat left in a canvas sack with a whisper of wet dog and a bold splash of brine and bilge. If hell has a scent, it probably took notes from a pirate ship. You try to make friends or at least avoid enemies. There's Peggy Joe who lost his eye in a barrel roll but insists it was a jewel taken from a Spanish assassin. There's Knuckles, a hulking brute who collects other people's teeth. You don't ask why. And there's a guy called Whisper who's always smiling and never says a word. He creeps you out. You tried to wash your crusty shirt in a bucket of rainwater, a foolish act of self-respect. Suddenly, Whisper, the silent one, was behind you. His smile never changed, but he lifted his hand, not to hit, but to point at the shirt. Then, slowly, he made a slashing motion across his own throat. The message was clear: don't waste the water, don't stand out. His silence was louder than any threat of the captain. It turns out you're the weird one for not having a nickname yet. That'll come, usually after something humiliating. Meal times are, let's call them formative. The ship's stores include salted meat that's more bone than flesh, hardtack biscuits with bugs baked in, and something that might have been pickled cabbage before it died. There's also rum, lots of rum, not to celebrate, but to numb. You learn fast that everyone drinks not for fun, but to cope. The rations are so foul you find yourself jealous of the rats. They look healthier than most of the crew. Fresh water is rationed, and it tastes like rust and regret. Washing? Don't make everyone laugh. You're not bathing out here unless you count the occasional rainstorm. And even then, you have to fight 10 other guys for a decent soak. Your clothes haven't been dry since you got here. Your socks are a biological hazard. You start to itch in places you didn't know could itch. Welcome to the glamorous life of a seaborne outlaw. Here's a historical gem for you. Pirates actually had some of the strictest codes when it came to sharing supplies. Despite their reputations, many crews kept careful inventory and were ferocious about rationing. Wasting water could get you flogged. Stealing food, death.
जैसे खाने के लिए
On some ships,
रिस्क
you'd be marooned,
जितना रिस्क
left
तो
on
मजा
a
आता है
rock
ना
with a pistol and a single
उतना मजा
shot,
नहीं
just in case starvation got boring.
सबसे ज्यादा
no,
मजा
it's not a buffet of rum and
पता है
roasted
क्यों
pigs. It's more like
रिस्क
the world's most
जितना रिस्क
dysfunctional summer
उतना
camp
मजा
run by angry drunks with knives. And
तुम्हें
then
पता है
there's the
सबसे ज्यादा
chores.
मजा किसे मारने में आता
Everyone
है?
pulls their weight.
किसी हाथी को मारने में
That
आता होगा और
includes
क्या?
cleaning the deck
नहीं।
with sand and seawater,
क्या?
patching sails while balancing on
सबसे
swaying
ज्यादा
masts,
मजा
and scrubbing out the bilge,
इंसान को
the
मारने में
lowest
आता
part
है।
of the ship where all the liquid waste settles.
तुम क्या कह रहे हो? क्या मुझे
It's as
मारने वाले हो?
pleasant as it
बिल्कुल।
sounds. You spend hours
तुम मुझे मारोगे तो क्या मैं ऐसे ही चुप बैठूंगी?
अरे ये सब बहुत easy है।
Smells like rotten despair.
वो
Guy
कैसे?
down there with you says he saw a crab with 3 eyes.
बताओ ना कैसे?
You don't know whether to believe him or to cry.
देखो दुपट्टे को ऐसे पकड़ेंगे,
You start to understand something
ऐसे
strange.
गले में डालेंगे, ठीक से डालना है, बस खींचो।
But
खींचो?
still a system. Everyone has a job, a ring, a place.
बस अब छोड़।
Captain barks orders and gets
Bicho.
the best food. Quartermaster handles disputes and hands out punishment. The rest of the crew follows orders and tries to. There's rhythm to it, a dark, sweaty rhythm that starts to worm its way into your bones. But you can't shake the loneliness. Out here, time is slippery. Days blend into nights and you sometimes forget what life is. There's no counting, no real routine, just an exertion of the horizon that refuses to come any closer. You start counting the stars at night, naming them in your head. You talk to the sea sometimes, out loud, just to hear your own voice. If the sea talks back, well, let's hope that's just sleep deprivation.
You insanity again.
Scholars still
they said that-
argue over whether pirates truly felt freedom the way modern minds romanticize it. Some claim the open sea gave them liberty unlike anything the mainland offered. No kings, no taxes, no rules but their own. Others point out that being hunted by every navy in the world, stuck on a disease-ridden vessel with sociopaths, isn't exactly liberating. But to the average press-ganged sailor like you, freedom feels a lot like imprisonment, just with more screaming and fewer walls. One of the strangest facts about pirate life, many pirates actually missed life on land, not for family or peace, but for the simple comfort of being bored. Out here, you're either terrified, exhausted, or sore. Sometimes all three. You dream about boredom now, about a day with nothing to do but sit. That would feel like heaven. As night falls again, and you curl up under plank of misery, trying not to touch the guy drooling beside you, you find yourself whispering the same 3 words over and over. Please don't sink, because if this ship goes down, you won't last 5 minutes in the sea. And that would actually be a mercy. By your 3rd week aboard the pirate ship, assuming you haven't been stabbed, thrown overboard, or crushed under a collapsing mast, you start to realize that the worst part of life at sea isn't the fear. It isn't even the violence. It's the food. Or what passes for food. Your body is already protesting, your stomach constantly growling like something's trying to crawl out. Every mealtime is a gamble, and the house always wins. You line up with the rest of the crew, bowl in hand, hoping for something edible. What you get instead is a ladle full of brown-gray mush with the consistency of wet ash and a smell that could knock out a goat. You don't ask what's in it. No one does. Asking questions is a fast track to being told to go lick barnacles instead. You spoon the stuff into your mouth and try not to gag. It's salty, sour, and chewy in all the wrong ways. You chew on something crunchy and don't investigate. That way lies madness. Then there's the hard tack. It's the official bread of pirates and a cruel joke invented by some sadistic baker back on land. These flour and water bricks have been in the barrel so long they've fossilized. You try to take a bite and nearly chip a tooth. Eventually, you learn the trick. Soak it in water or rum, then suck on it until it surrenders. Except even then, it comes with a special surprise: maggots. Little white ones squirming happily inside the biscuit like it's a spa. Some guys pick them out. Most don't bother. Protein's protein, right? Fresh food is a fantasy. The fruits and vegetables vanished weeks ago. Meat is salted into near jerky and stored in barrels that smell worse than the bilge. Water is rationed so carefully that bathing with it would get you stabbed. You drink beer or watered-down rum instead, which means you're constantly buzzed, mildly dehydrated, and getting scurvy by the day. Not that you know that yet. The first signs are just bleeding gums and weird bruises. The fun part comes later. To make things extra festive, you've got a cook named Blacktooth who seems to take personal pride in making everything taste like regret. He's missing most of his teeth, including the ones in the back that make chewing possible. Uses a knife that looks like it was fished out of a volcano, and he seasons everything with something called ship spice, which is probably just ground up rope and sea salt. He grunts at you if you ask for seconds, and he'll throw a ladle at your head if you criticize his stew. It still might be the most stable relationship on the ship. Pirates historically had a very real problem with nutrition. Their diet was severely lacking in vitamins, especially vitamin C. Scurvy was practically a rite of passage. Sailors' gums would swell and bleed, teeth fell out, joints ached, and wounds refused to heal. In advanced cases, the flesh on their legs would blacken and rot. You noticed the first bruise on your thigh, not from a fall, but a deep, inexplicable purple mark. The color was alien, a dark flag of warning from within. That night, your knee joints ached with a dull, insistent throbbing, a counter-rhythm to the ship's endless sway. It felt less like an injury and more like your body was dissolving from the inside out. And yet many crews didn't even know what caused it. Some blamed sea air. Others thought it was punishment from God. You just know that your teeth feel weird and your gums itch. That can't be good. And then there's the booze. Grog, they call it. It's a mix of water, rum, and sometimes citrus if you're really lucky. Spoiler, you're not. The purpose of grog is less about enjoyment and more about killing off the bacteria in the water. It does the job. It also gets people drunk enough to forget how miserable they are, which is apparently an unofficial survival strategy. The downside is that everyone is slightly tipsy all the time, which makes climbing rigging in high winds, let's say, eventful. You find yourself craving strange things. Apples, fresh bread, cheese. You dream about cheese. Not even fancy cheese. Just a sad little wedge of anything that didn't come out of a barrel. One guy starts talking in his sleep about buttered toast. You cry a little listening to him. Butter? What even is butter anymore? Did it ever really exist, or was it just a dream someone wrote down? Food fights aren't playful here. They're desperate. Someone gets caught hoarding dried fruit, and he ends up getting locked in the brig for a week. He didn't even know the ship had a brig. It's basically a cupboard that leaks. And the rats there have tattoos. The thief comes out thin, twitchy, and missing half an eyebrow. No one talks about it. But everyone glances at the food barrels a little more suspiciously after that. There's a strange psychological shift that happens after enough bad meals. You stop seeing food as food. It becomes fuel, a grim necessity. You eat what you must and try not to taste it. You chew without enthusiasm, like someone clocking in for a shift they hate. The joy gets sucked out of it, replaced with calculation. Will this make me sick? Will I regret this? Can I keep it down? Now, here's a fun fringe fact. Some pirates believe that eating rats could stave off starvation and sometimes scurvy. Rats, after all, ate anything, including spoiled fruit that still had traces of vitamin C. So, yes, eating a rat could technically be healthy. There are stories, possibly exaggerated, of crews chasing rats around the hold like it was sport. On really desperate voyages, they'd be considered a delicacy. You haven't seen anyone eat a rat yet, but you've definitely seen some people eyeing them a little too long. As if the food itself wasn't cruel enough, the preparation methods are also delightfully medieval. There's no stove, just a firebox set on bricks in the galley when it's safe enough to use fire at all. On stormy days, you're stuck with cold hardtack and sour beer. On good days, you might get boiled fish, but good luck finding the fish that doesn't taste like seawater and sadness. Scholars still argue about how much pirate crews actually suffered from malnutrition versus how much was exaggerated in sailor legends. Some accounts mention thriving crews full of healthy, bronzed rogues as feasting on fresh seafood. Others describe them as skeletal wrecks with bloated limbs and sunken eyes. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, though right now you're definitely leaning towards skeletal wreck territory. And the irony, despite all this misery, pirates had it slightly better than Navy sailors. Royal Navy ships rationed even more tightly, and punishments were harsher. On a pirate ship, you might starve, but at least you can complain about it without getting whipped. Not that it helps. Tonight, you lie awake in the dark, your stomach doing gymnastics, trying to recall what a pear tastes like. Was it sweet, juicy? Did it even exist, or are you imagining it? Someone nearby farts in their sleep. Another groans. You think about rats. You try not to think about rats. And once again, you whisper into the dark, "Please don't sink." At first, you thought the worst part of this floating nightmare would be the food. Or maybe the constant threat of death by cannonball. But no, you were wrong. So deeply, horribly wrong. Because now your gums are bleeding, your breath smells like an open grave, and the left side of your jaw is pulsing like it's drumming out Morse code for "kill me." You've got a toothache. And out here, that's basically a death sentence wearing a smile. There are no dentists on a pirate ship. No sterile tools, no reclining chairs with cheerful little bibs. What you do have is a guy named the Butcher, who once helped yank a mare out of someone's skull during a storm using nothing but a rusted hook and a bottle of rum. He's now considered the ship's surgeon. Congratulations, you're in his care. He doesn't even ask what's wrong. He just squints at your face, mutters, rots deep, and starts warming a pair of iron tongs over a candle. You try to run. He grabs you by the collar and shoves you into a barrel to sit. You're given a stick to bite down on and a small slug of rum, which does absolutely nothing except make you feel like puking and panicking at the same time. The crew gathers around like it's a puppet show. You scream before the tongs even touch you. The Butcher isn't gentle. He yanks, twists, then yells, "Hold him," when you flail. There's a crunch, a pop, and then pain so white-hot it feels like lightning got lodged in your skull. Tooth problems were absurdly common at sea. All that hard tack and no real hygiene meant pirates' mouths were rotting disasters. Cavities festered, gums swelled, infections spread. There are journals from the time describing black mouths and jaw worms, which sound made up, but sadly aren't. The standard solution: yank it out and hope for the best. Anesthesia, if it existed, was usually just rum and pressure applied to your chest so you didn't flail too hard. Occasionally, people died from shock or blood loss. You're lucky you only passed out for a bit and woke up with one less tooth and the taste of iron in your throat. But that's just the appetizer. The real horror comes a few days later when fever sets in. You're shaking, soaked in sweat, and your jaw is ballooned into a grotesque lump. The infection didn't leave, it just went deeper. Now it's creeping toward your brain, whispering sweet nothings of death and delirium. Someone says it might be blood poisoning. Someone else says you're cursed. No one offers an actual cure. You lie in your hammock, mouth swollen, drooling, and muttering to yourself. And honestly, you're kind of impressed you made it this far. If it's not the teeth that get you, it'll be the limbs. See, pirate life is physically brutal. Every day you're pulling ropes, climbing rigging, lifting barrels, and swinging onto decks during raids. All that action means injuries. And out here, injuries turn ugly fast. A twisted ankle? Good luck walking. A splinter in the wrong place that could fester into an abscess the size of a crab. And then there's the big one, amputation. Lose a finger or a hand and you're still considered lucky. Lose a leg and now you've got a nickname and a permanent limp, assuming you live through the sawing. You get your first amputation show 2 weeks later. A quarrel over rations leads one sailor to stab another man's limb in a fit of rage. He doesn't scream at first, just stares at the dangling mass of bone and flesh like it betrayed him. Then the pain hits. The butcher is called again. This time he brings out the kit, which is just a roll of bloody cloth, a saw that smells like rot, and a jug of really strong rum. The patient is strapped down. There's no debate. If the arm stays, he dies. If it goes, he might live. That's the whole decision-making process. No second opinions. The crew gathers again. You don't want to watch, but somehow you do. The saw goes through the muscle with a wet crunching sound, and the screaming is so raw it echoes through your spine. When it's over, the butcher throws the limb overboard and wipes his hands on his pants. The man survives, barely. He wakes up sobbing, then laughing. You're not sure which is worse. Historically, surgery at sea was a grim affair. Pirate surgeons, when they existed, were often just failed doctors or shipwrights who knew how to saw wood and figured how different can a leg be. They used hot tar to cauterize wounds and sewed you up with thread that had probably mended sails the day before. Sterilization, never heard of her. If you didn't die from the procedure, you still had to survive infection, fever, and the fact that you were in a floating germ tank with rats chewing your bandages at night. There's an open debate among historians about how many pirates actually underwent amputations and survived. Some argue survival rates were surprisingly high given the rugged nature of pirate medicine. Others insist that any success stories were exaggerated over time to build pirate mythology. Either way, if you go under the butcher's blade, you're not betting on science. You're betting on sheer dumb luck. And luck, she's not always kind. You've seen the guy with the wooden peg leg. He walks with a thunk and a grimace and claims he used to be the fastest sailor on the sea. Now he spends most days polishing his leg with whale oil and telling anyone who'll listen how he once kicked a man off a plank. With a good leg, mind you. He's one of the few who laughs about it. The others, they stay quiet, like the sea took more than just flesh. You start brushing your teeth with a bit of rag and rum, just in case. You pray you never get a splinter. You avoid the butcher like he's a ghost. You check your limbs every morning like their inventory. Everything still attached? Good. You made it another day. Tonight, as the ship groans and the sea slaps against the hull like an angry dog, you lie awake again, staring into the dark, listening to someone 3 hammocks over, cough like they're dying. And you think, this can't possibly get worse. You're wrong, of course. You thought pirates were lawless, wild, unhinged, and okay, some of them absolutely are. But here's the twist. Pirate ships have rules. Lots of them. More than you'd expect from a bunch of guys who can't spell authority without stabbing someone halfway through the word. They call it the code. And you better learn it fast because ignorance isn't an excuse when the punishment involves whips, knives, or a nice lonely island where you can die of exposure and regret. The code isn't written on fine parchment. It's not even nailed to the mast. It lives in memory and teeth-clenched whispers passed down like ghost stories with his blood at the margins. The first time you hear it, it's from the quartermaster. A scarred man with a voice like gravel and a nose that's seen too many arguments. He calls you and a few other recruits to the deck and runs through the basics like a school teacher who has already accepted your failure. Rule 1: equal shares. Not exactly what you expected from a group of self-serving criminals, but pirates hate unfair captains more than they hate the Navy. When they take a prize, gold, food, weapons, whatever, it gets divided according to rank. But even the lowest deckhand gets something. No more of that, you get paid in glory nonsense like back on merchant ships. Out here, everyone wants a cut, and God help you if you try to cheat. Rule 2: keep your gear in check. That includes weapons, clothes, and anything the crew depends on. Lose your pistol in a raid? That's 10 lashes. Let your powder get wet? 20. Forget to clean your musket? You might get tossed overboard just to think about it. The crew doesn't tolerate mistakes because mistakes out here cost lives and loot. Rule 3: fight fair, among yourselves. Disputes are settled by duel or vote, depending on how much blood anyone's willing to spill. Some arguments get resolved with fists at dawn. Others involve knives, a circle of chanting drunk men, and someone walking away with fewer fingers than they started with. The important thing is that once it's done, it's done. Carrying a grudge longer than a few days is suspicious, and suspicious people get watched. Watched people get eliminated. The code goes on: lights out at sunset unless it's a special occasion. No gambling during a storm. No smuggling personal treasure aboard. And definitely, absolutely no sneaking into someone else's hammock, romantic or otherwise. That last one is especially enforced, and the crew seems unusually passionate about it. You suspect someone had a very bad experience involving a love triangle and a cannon fuse. Now, here's the weird part. These rules, they kind of make sense. Pirate crews couldn't rely on the law, so they made their own. And unlike most naval officers, captains on pirate ships could be voted out. If the crew lost confidence, they held a vote and picked someone new. Usually the guy who looks scariest with his shirt off. It's rough, but weirdly democratic. Historically, this system wasn't fantasy. Real pirate codes like those of Bartholomew Roberts or Black Bart were shockingly detailed. They covered conduct, loot division, punishment, even what music could be played on board. Some codes banned gambling entirely. Others required everyone to keep their cutlasses sharp at all times. The idea was to maintain order, not out of morality, but out of sheer survival. An undisciplined crew was a dead one. But here's where it gets dicey: enforcement of the code. That's up to the mood of the ship. One day, someone drops a dagger and gets a warning. The next, someone forgets to clean a cannon and ends up lashed to the mast with their back looking like shredded sailcloth. Justice here is more like a storm, random, loud, and full of things flying through the air. One guy, young, maybe 17, gets caught pocketing a silver spoon after a raid. A spoon. The captain doesn't even blink. He orders the boy to be tied up and whipped 12 times in front of the whole crew. The kid doesn't cry. He just grits his teeth and takes it. Blood running down his back like spilled wine. Afterward, he's untied and given a piece of cloth to bite on. "Don't do it again," someone says, the words hollow. Like that's going to help. You don't sleep well that night. Punishments vary wildly. lashes are common. Flogging leaves scars that never fade and sometimes kills. But there are worse fates. Marooning, a kind of pirate exile, is a favorite for traitors or major screw-ups. You get dropped on a deserted island with a pistol and a single shot. Not enough to survive, just enough to make your own ending if starvation, sun, and madness don't do it first. And then there's keel hauling. You'd heard of it in drunken rumors, but figured it couldn't be real. It is. A rope tied around your chest and feet. You're thrown into the water and dragged under the ship's hull. Barnacles rip skin. Water fills your lungs. If you come up at all, it's as a screaming, shredded version of yourself. If you don't, well, you become one with the sea. Luckily, it's rare. Even pirates think it's a bit much. Some historians debate whether these punishments were as frequent as the legends say. Keel hauling, for instance, might have been more of a naval thing than a pirate tradition, and marooning, while well documented, may have happened less often than the stories suggest. What's certain is that pirate crews enforced their codes fiercely, partly for control, partly out of paranoia. Trust was everything, and once it cracked, the consequences were brutal. One of the more fringe details you learn is about articles' tattoos. Some pirates actually had parts of the code inked onto their bodies, especially the rules about shares and fairness. It wasn't just for show. If someone died in battle, their tattooed rules could help settle disputes over loot, or at least give someone something to read while looting the corpse. You don't have any tattoos yet, but you're starting to think maybe one wouldn't hurt. Just something small. Maybe, don't steal spoons. Oddly enough, the longer you live under the code, the more it warps your sense of justice. You start seeing things less like right or wrong and more like smart or stupid. Morality gets blurry. Survival, on the other hand, sharpens like a knife. You do what keeps you breathing and hope your name never gets called when punishment rolls around. Tonight you hear whispers about a man planning to jump ship. Not during a raid, just in the middle of the night when he thinks no one's watching. He's sick of the code, sick of the food, sick of the noise. You don't know if he'll do it. But you lie awake anyway, wondering what happens if he does. Would they chase him down? Would they shoot him as he swam? Or worse, would they let him go and pretend he never existed? Either way, you're starting to realize out here, freedom is just another word for following very specific rules or dying horribly. And tomorrow, there will be more rules to learn and more people failing to follow them. You wake up to screaming, not panicked, not terrified, more like two drunks laughing about whose turn it is to shovel filth out of the bilge. It's still dark, probably just before dawn, and the air below deck is thick with sweat, old grog, and the unmistakable sour tang of unwashed bodies. You roll over and nearly tumble straight into a puddle of what you hope is spilled rum. Another day in paradise. There's no privacy on a pirate ship. None. Everyone sleeps, eats, pukes, and argues in the same cramped space. The smell is biblical. It clings to your clothes, your skin, your hair. You wash in salt water when you can, but that doesn't do much beyond moving the filth around in new creative patterns. There's a reason pirates don't wear white, they look like moldy cheese after a week. And your crewmates, oh, they're a delight. A full cast of misfits and sociopaths, each more disturbing than the last. There's Rat-Face Pete, who keeps dead seagulls in a crate for luck. There's One-Shoe Jack, who talks to his belt like it's a person. And there's Old Brody, who once pulled out his own tooth with a hook and now keeps it on a string around his neck like a trophy. You avoid them when you can, but there's nowhere to hide on this floating coffin. Eventually, someone will corner you and start rambling about sea monsters or how the moon is plotting against them. These aren't movie pirates. They don't sing sea shanties with perfect harmonies. They bicker. They cough blood and argue over dice games made up on the spot. Many of them are criminals who were too awful even for land, murderers, deserters, and drunks who got kicked off other ships. And now they're your co-workers. Your very armed, very unstable co-workers. One night, you hear a thud in the dark, a fight over a missing knife. Someone ends up with a broken nose. The next morning, it's like nothing happened, except the blood's still on the floor, and one guy is now missing half an eyebrow. Conflict is constant. Fights break out over stolen rations, cheating at cards, someone snoring too loud. You learn to sleep with your boots on and your knife under your hammock. Not that it would help much. Historically, pirate crews were a mixed bag of humanity's worst impulses. You would get ex-Navy men, escaped slaves, failed farmers, and thieves from every continent. Ships like Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge were said to be floating towers of Babel with up to a dozen nationalities crammed into one rotting hull. Communication was mostly shouting and gestures, with a bit of shared profanity thrown in. If someone didn't like you, they didn't bother with gossip. They just made sure you slipped on the wet deck during the next storm. Yet somehow, despite all the madness, the crew functions. They sail the ship. They prepare for raids. They haul supplies, load cannons, and keep the ship moving. It's not order, it's survival instinct. Everyone knows that if the crew collapses, the ship sinks. So, the rage and chaos get channeled into a strange sort of rhythm. You grow used to the screaming, the sudden bursts of violence, and the silent, grim camaraderie that follows. You may not like each other, but you all want to stay alive, barely. Here's something extra weird. Some pirates actually preferred life at sea because of this chaos. They like that nobody asked about your past. That you could be a nobody one day and the guy leading a raid the next. If you were tough, ruthless, and loud, you earned respect, regardless of where you came from. There were even cases of black and indigenous pirates being treated as equals, at least more equally than on any land-bound society at the time. Not out of kindness, mind you, but practicality. Everyone pulls rope the same way when you're trying not to die. Still, there's a fringe belief among some sailors that the ship chooses who stays, that it eats the weak and keeps the wicked. A man who can't hold his liquor, who pukes at the sight of blood, who cries during storms, he's not long for this world. The sea wants hard men, or at least ones who can fake it. And some nights, lying in your damp hammock, listening to someone cough their lungs out across the room, you wonder which one you are. One day you get paired with someone on deck duty, a guy called Elias. He's quiet, probably too smart for this life. He shows you how to tie a proper bowline and how to judge wind shifts by watching the sails flutter. He smells like old salt and bad choices, but he doesn't talk to his shoes or carry seagull bones, so you latch on. It's the closest thing to friendship you found here. Elias tells you stories about a ship that went mad and sailed in circles until the crew starved, and about a ghostly vessel that sails only in moonlight and sinks anything it touches. You don't know if he's lying or just trying to scare you, but his voice is calm and low, and you don't mind listening. He tells you the only way to survive is to be useful and be invisible. Not too good, not too lazy, just there, a face no one remembers when the knife comes out. That night you dream of being thrown overboard. Not during a storm, just casually, like someone taking out the trash. You wake up drenched in sweat, and you can't tell if the moisture came from the sea air or your own panic. There's an ongoing scholarly debate about how much internal violence actually occurred on pirate ships. Some argue that the chaos is overblown, crews had to function after all. Others believe the tension was constant and explosive, only managed through the looming threat of violent reprisal. What's certain is that these weren't merry bands of freedom-loving rogues. They were volatile, desperate, and tightly wound. The kind of men who'd stab you for looking at their hammock too long. You've started counting the days, not because you think rescue is coming, but because you want to know how long you've lasted. It's your badge of honor now. Another day survived in this floating cage of screaming, coughing, and threats muttered through broken teeth. You've gone from hopeful to hardened, from passenger to prisoner to something else. And somewhere deep in your bones, a question forms. You whisper it at night when you're sure no one can hear. Am I one of them now? You barely sleep anymore. Not because the ship is loud, though it is, or because your hammock smells like a goat died in it, though it does. It's the night watch. Everyone's got to take a turn, and your turn comes more often than you'd like. You learn pretty quickly that night on a pirate ship isn't peaceful or quiet. It's teeth-gritting, nerve-grinding, eyes straining in the dark paranoia. It's you in a flickering lantern surrounded by the kind of blackness that makes you doubt your own shape. You're posted near the foredeck with a musket that might fire if you beg it. The lantern beside you swings with the rhythm of the waves, casting warped shadows across the rigging. The ship creaks and groans, a symphony of wood protesting its own existence. And then there's the sea itself, lapping, slapping, whispering against the hull. Sometimes it sounds like laughter. Sometimes it sounds like something breathing. You try not to think about that. Your job is simple: look for ships and scream if you see one. That's it. Of course, you don't want to see anything because if you do, it usually means trouble, a Navy cutter, a rival pirate ship, maybe a merchant vessel if you're lucky. And even that means cannon fire, blood, and chaos. Still, watching nothing feels like madness after a few hours. You stare so hard into the dark that you start seeing things. Lights that aren't there. Shapes that vanish when you blink. One night, you're sure you see a sail, a ghostly flicker on the edge of the horizon. You call it out, heart hammering. The captain looks, nothing. You get mocked for the next 2 days. Sleep deprivation is part of the job. You doze in awkward bursts between shifts, waking up unsure what century it is. One day bleeds into the next, each one as gray and salt-streaked as the last. You start forgetting things, words, names, where you put your belt. Your muscles ache. Your eyelids twitch. You catch yourself talking to the mast like it's an old friend. You're not the only one. There's a guy called Henley who whispers to the sea at night, begging it to take him kindly. Another guy just stares at his hands, flexing them like he's not sure they're real anymore. Historically, pirate ships ran 24 hours a day, and the crew was split into watches. The night watch was grueling, not just for the physical strain, but the psychological toll. The dark was filled with threats, storms, reefs, surprise attacks, even supernatural fears. Pirates, like many seamen of the era, were deeply superstitious. Bad omens could be anything from a red sunrise to a bird landing on the mast. You learn these superstitions fast. You have to. The crew believes in them like gospel, and breaking one is a fast way to get yourself hated. Or worse. Case in point, one night a bird lands on the bowsprit, a black seabird slick with rain. It just sits there, staring. No one wants to touch it. Bad luck, says Whisper, who never speaks except, apparently, to say that. The captain orders it shot. The bird explodes into feathers and blood. And for a moment, everyone relaxes. That is, until the storm hits. A freak squall, lashing rain, howling wind, sails snapping like whips. You spend 6 hours soaked, frozen, clinging to ropes that could yank you into the abyss. No one says it, but you all think the same thing: the bird cursed us. You don't even question it anymore. Sleep deprivation takes a toll in strange ways. One night, you hallucinate. You see your childhood home, clear as day, floating just off the starboard side. You smell fresh bread, hear your mother calling your name, and you reach out and almost step off the ship. Someone yanks you back. No one says anything. Hallucinations aren't rare out here. They're just not talked about. A few of the older pirates admit they've seen mermaids. Not the pretty kind. These ones have bloated, dead faces and nails like fishhooks. One swears he kissed one once. He has no lips now. You don't ask for details. There's debate among historians about just how frequent hallucinations were among pirates and sailors. Some accounts describe vivid shared visions. Others dismiss them as exaggerations from sailors desperate to make their stories more exciting. But given the mix of bad nutrition, lack of sleep, constant fear, and potent rum, it's a wonder more pirates didn't completely lose it. Out here, reality gets slippery. And when you're alone with nothing but sea and stars, your brain fills in the blanks with whatever nightmares it can dig up. You start to understand why pirates believe in monsters. Because something about the sea feels alive. It moves under you, whispers around you, punishes you without warning. You stare into it long enough and it stares back. Elias tells you about the sea eyes, a feeling that the ocean is watching. Sometimes, he says, it looks up at you and decides whether you're worth keeping. You laugh, then you realize he's not joking. One night, you're paired with Elias again. The two of you sit side by side, passing a bottle of grog and pretending not to be scared. He tells you about a time he saw a green light on the water. Just a flash. And then a sailor next to him was gone. No splash, no scream, just gone. Sometimes the sea takes one, he says, so it doesn't have to take all. You shiver, and it's not from the you wish for sleep, but when it comes, it's not kind. You dream of sinking, gasping, clawing, screaming, of your body tumbling through black water while things slither past your ears. You wake up gasping, your hands gripping the hammock like you're still drowning. Someone nearby farts. The spell breaks, but the terror lingers. The night watch becomes a part of you. Your eyes adjust to the dark. Your hearing sharpens. You can tell who's sneaking grog from 10 feet away. You can tell when the weather's about to shift just by the tone of the creaking wood. You become, in a strange way, a creature of the night. Always alert, never rested, half real, half ghost. One of the more fringe facts you pick up is that some pirates believe their souls were tied to the stars, that if they died at sea, their spirit would rise and become part of the night sky. It's a comforting idea in a bleak, haunted sort of way. You start to look at the stars differently. Not just as points of light, but maybe as people who'd had enough. Maybe someday you'll be up there, too. Just a pinprick of light over a cold, endless sea. But for now, you're still here, still watching, still blinking into the black, praying that you see nothing at all. Morning hits like a slap. You're only halfway through a restless nap when someone yells, "All hands," and the deck becomes a stampede. You swing out of your hammock, groggy and sour, boots hitting the boards before your eyes are even open. The sky is dark, thick with clouds, and the wind has that sharp edge like it's looking for someone to shove off a ledge. It starts slowly, a groan from the rigging, the sails snapping too hard. The ocean, already never calm, takes on a new kind of rhythm, one that churns rather than rolls. The bow rises a little too high, then drops a little too fast. Somewhere deep in the ship, the timbers creak like they're complaining to the gods. That's when the rain begins. Not gentle droplets. No, this is a vertical river falling in sheets so dense you can't see 5 feet in front of your face. And with the rain comes the real enemy, the storm. You're yelled at to help secure the sails. That means climbing. That means clinging to ropes slick with rain and salt while the ship bucks like a furious animal. Wind howls in your ears. Your hands bleed from the lines, and your boots slide against every rung of the rigging. The sea throws spray across the deck like it's trying to scrub the crew away. Every wave slams the hull, shuddering the whole ship, making it groan in its bones. You lose track of time. Could be 10 minutes or 2 hours. All you know is water, shouting, and terror. Lightning cracks across the sky, closer than you've ever seen. And for a second, the entire ship glows in harsh white light. You see every crewmate in full silhouette, soaked, desperate, clinging. Then darkness returns, worse than before. Thunder follows, deep and ragged like a monster breathing. And through it all, you hang on. Fingers numb, eyes stinging, praying not even to survive, just to not fall yet. Storms at sea are the true crucible. Forget cannonballs and curses. This is the thing that tests whether you were built for this life. Historically, many pirate ships were lost not to battle, but to storms. A bad squall could splinter masts, rip sails, and roll a ship like it was made of paper. The golden age of piracy wasn't just cutlasses and treasure maps. It was hurricane seasons and rogue waves. The Caribbean, especially, was notorious for sudden, violent tempests that sank vessels without warning. One guy near you slips. His scream is brief. He hits the deck hard, rolling, limbs bent in ways they shouldn't be. You think he's dead, but someone drags him below deck, shouting for the surgeon. You don't see him again that day. You don't ask. The storm gets worse. The captain barks orders that you barely hear. The quartermaster ties himself to the wheel. You see Elias shouting something, pointing, then vanish behind a curtain of water. For a moment, the deck is just you and the rain and the thunder. Then another wave hits and you almost fly backward. A rope lashes your arm and saves your life. You cling to it like it's a lifeline, because it is. The water's rising now. The deck floods with every wave. Below deck it's worse, dark, crowded, and half submerged. Barrels float like bobbing coffins. The bilge is overflowing. Men scramble to pump water out, but it's a losing battle. Someone starts throwing cargo overboard, trying to lighten the load. You toss 2 crates yourself, not even checking what's inside. Could be gold, could be biscuits, doesn't matter. It's dead weight now. Eventually, the storm begins to pull away slowly, like a beast losing interest in its meal. The rain eases. The wind slackens. The waves settle from monstrous to merely miserable. The sky remains dark, but it's no longer trying to tear you in half. You collapse on the deck, coughing up salt water, soaked to the bone and shaking with exhaustion. You survived. You don't know how, but you did, for now. But the damage is everywhere. The sails are torn, 2 masts cracked, 1 crewman dead, another missing. That last one, missing, is whispered like a curse. Not because they think he survived. No. Out here, missing means taken by the sea. And if you believe in that sort of thing, and you're starting to, you don't speak his name for fear the ocean might hear and come for you next. One of the more fringe beliefs among pirates was that storms weren't just weather. They were punishment for betrayal, for cowardice, for mocking the sea. Some even claimed they could feel when a storm was coming based on the mood of the ship or the mood of the water. You're not sure what to believe, but it's hard to dismiss the feeling that the ocean has a mind of its own, a cruel, calculating one. Some historians say pirates were especially vulnerable to storms because their ships were lighter and faster, built for speed, not sturdiness. Others argue that pirates were skilled navigators and storm dodgers, masters of reading wind and wave. But either way, even the best ship couldn't always win against nature's wrath. Storms didn't discriminate. Rich, poor, pirate, navy, they took who they wanted. After the chaos comes the work, hours of repairs, climbing back up to patch sails, securing cracked beams, hauling drenched supplies back into storage. No one rests. Not really. You move like ghosts, drenched and grim, eyes hollow. The man who died is wrapped in canvas and weighted with stones. There's no ceremony, just a nod, a lift, and a splash. The sea gets what it wants again. You finally sleep that night, if you can call it that. It's more like collapsing into unconsciousness. Your body too drained to dream. You wake up hours later with your fingers still curled into fists, nails digging into your palms like you were still gripping the ship even in your sleep. And here's the kicker. No one thanks you. No one praises you for surviving, for climbing, for hauling, for not dying, because everyone else did the same, or didn't. This is just another part of the job. Another nightmare you don't get a medal for. Out here, surviving a storm doesn't make you special. It just means you're still useful. So, you stagger back to your duties with the rest of the half-drowned, half-broken crew. You eat something bland and terrible. You scrub the deck because there's always blood and grime to be cleaned. You refill the water casks. You try not to look at the empty hammocks. And as the wind picks up again and the horizon starts to ripple in that particular way, you catch yourself whispering a new kind of prayer. Not today. Not again, please. Not again. You don't really notice it at first. Your nose adjusts so fast you almost forget what clean air ever felt like. But then the ship docks near a port just briefly, and someone opens a cask of actual oranges, and suddenly your whole body remembers what normal smells like. The citrus stabs you in the face like a memory. And that's when it hits you. You stink. Everyone stinks. The ship stinks. Everything on this floating hunk of death stinks in a way that feels permanent. It's not just the sweat or the mildew or the fact that no one's bathed in weeks, except during rainstorms when they strip off their shirts and laugh like madmen. It's deeper than that. The ship smells like 1,000 sins baking in the sun. Rancid fat, unwashed bodies, rotting food, stale grog, dried blood, and something sweetly sour that you can't identify and definitely don't want to. Every surface is sticky, every fabric greasy. You touch a rope and your hand comes away smelling like salt and dead dreams. Below deck, the air is unbreathable. You have to duck your head, stoop like you're walking into a crypt, and squeeze between hammocks, swaying like meat in a butcher shop. It's hot even when it's cold, damp even when it's dry outside. You learn not to breathe through your nose. That's a rookie mistake. You breathe through your mouth, shallow and careful. And you pretend you're not inhaling 50 other people's exhalations. People try to help themselves, barely. Some chew cloves if they can steal them. Others wipe their pits with rags soaked in vinegar, which honestly smells worse than sweat. There's one guy, bless him, who found a crushed flower petal on shore leave and now tucks it behind his ear like he's some kind of perfume merchant. He still smells like a corpse marinated in rum. But hey, points for effort. You stopped noticing your own stench. That's the worst part. You can't tell if your socks smell like mildew or just sadness. You sleep in the same clothes you worked in, bled in, threw up in. You can't even be sure what color your shirt used to be. Yellow? White? It's gray now, stained with everything the sea has to offer. Your boots are permanently damp. You don't even want to think about what's growing in them. One day, the ship passes close to another vessel, and you actually hear someone on the other deck gag. By God, what is that? They yell, covering their face with a kerchief. Your crew laughs. It's a badge of honor to them. You, though, you start to feel like your skin has become part of the ship. That maybe the stench isn't just on you. It's in you. Like the ship has infected you cell by cell. Historically, ships were hygiene disasters. Fresh water was limited, soap was rare, and sanitation didn't exist. Pirates sometimes did better than Navy sailors, if only because they spent more time ashore and were less bound by strict routines. But that didn't stop the spread of lice, fleas, and disease. Your body is a war zone now. You itch constantly. You've scratched your leg raw more than once. One guy found a worm in his sock. Not a leech, a worm. You pray it never happens to you. You haven't properly defecated in private since your first day aboard. The toilet, if you can call it that, is a plank extended off the back of the ship with a rope to hold onto. You crawl out there, praying the ship doesn't jolt, pants around your ankles, wind howling, sea beneath you like a giant mouth. It's terrifying. One wrong move and you're food for sharks. Sometimes you hold it for days just to avoid the trip. That, of course, leads to its own horrors: constipation, gut pain, gas that makes everyone around you threaten murder. One crewmate, Jory, brags he once spent 5 minutes on the plank in a hurricane. Says it was spiritual. You suspect he's got brain damage. And the smell isn't just bad, it's dangerous. Infections fester in damp wounds. Mold grows in clothes that never dry. Rats thrive below deck, feeding on crumbs and anything soft. Someone swears they saw a rat crawl into a hammock and nibble on a sleeping man's ear. He woke up, apparently, and tried to chew the rat back. You can't verify that story, but nothing would surprise you at this point. Fringe fact for you. There are recorded tales of ships being so rank that ports refused them entry. In the Caribbean, some port authorities demanded bribes just to let pirate vessels dock, partly because of their notorious reputations and partly because of their unbearable stench. You always thought that was exaggeration. Now you know better. You wouldn't let yourself into port if you were in charge. There's a scholarly debate over whether pirates had better hygiene than the average Navy crew. Some argue they did. Less formality meant more frequent dips in the ocean, more access to fresh water from stolen supplies. Others say it's wishful thinking. Life at sea was disgusting. Period. And pirates weren't exempt. They just might have had more fun while rotting alive. And here's the grossest part. Sometimes the smell saves your life. You can sniff out infection before it hits hard. You recognize the rank musk of fevered sweat, the metallic tang of blood from a fresh wound, the sour milk reek of pus. You know when someone's dying by the way the air thickens around them. Your nose becomes a survival tool. Horrifying, yes, but useful. You find yourself fantasizing about just a bar of soap, maybe two. You imagine scrubbing your scalp until your fingernails come away clean. You imagine stepping into a bath so hot your skin turns red and coming out smelling like something other than despair. One day, a crewmate finds a bar of soap hidden in a crate from a recent raid. He holds it up like a relic from a lost civilization. Then, in full view of the crew, he eats it. "Thought it was cheese," he says. No one even flinches. Tonight, as the wind shifts and the smell of bilge and sweat wafts through the narrow passage where you sleep, you lie with your arm over your face, trying not to breathe too deeply. Someone farts 2 hammocks over. Someone else coughs a thick, phlegmy cough. The guy next to you mumbles in his sleep, "Please don't rot yet," over and over. And you think, I'd trade all the gold in the Caribbean for a clean shirt, dry boots, and 15 minutes in a bath. You know you'll get none of those, but still you hope. You'd think the worst part of pirate combat would be the fear, the panic, the yelling, the chaos. And yeah, that's all bad. But what really gets you is the confusion. You imagine sword fights being elegant and cool, graceful moves, witty quips, maybe a flashy spin or two. Nope, not here. Combat aboard a pirate ship is a screaming, filthy pile of limbs, smoke, blood, and bad decisions. It's fast. It's loud, and it smells like burned powder and wet intestines. It always starts the same way. A ship spotted on the horizon. A tense moment while the crew squints at the sails and guesses, merchant or military? If it's a merchant, you might live. If it's Navy, well, sharpen your blade and kiss your lucky charm. The captain calls for silence. Everyone crouches, hides, waits. You slip behind a barrel, heart hammering, palms slick. The order comes, raise the black. The Jolly Roger goes up, snapping in the wind. Sometimes that's enough. A lot of merchant captains will just drop their sails and surrender. Better that than face a horde of sea-drenched lunatics with pistols and wild eyes. But when they don't surrender, the cannons start. The noise is indescribable. You feel it in your bones more than hear it. A deep, concussive boom that shakes the whole world. The recoil nearly knocks the gun crews off their feet. The deck trembles under you. The smell of sulfur is thick in the air. Splinters rain down like angry wooden wasps. You duck instinctively, even though you're not entirely sure from what. Cannons aren't accurate. They're not meant to be. They're meant to smash, to terrify, to punch holes in the hull, or scatter enemy crew. You hear a screech from the other ship as a shot lands, followed by shouting. Your ship returns fire. You watch a cannonball miss completely and land in the ocean with a slap. The gunners swear like poets. You just try not to throw up. Then comes the boarding. Grappling hooks fly. Ropes swing. Pistols are fired more out of habit than accuracy. You follow the crew across the makeshift gangplanks. Or worse, you jump. You land badly. Roll. Scramble up in time to parry a wild swing from a man who looks just as terrified as you feel. It's not a duel, it's a brawl. There's no rhythm to it. No honor, just desperation. You stab at anything moving that isn't dressed like you. You get punched, bitten. Someone slams the butt of a musket into your ribs. You hear a scream nearby, too high-pitched. A boy. You don't look. You don't want to know. Pistols are mostly useless after the first shot. They're one and done unless you've got time to reload, which you don't. You've seen guys wield them like clubs, beating enemies with the barrel. Swords? Forget the sleek cutlasses from the stories. These blades are rusted, chipped, bent. One guy swings a meat cleaver. Another uses an axe that still has bits of rope stuck in the handle. You fight with whatever keeps you upright. At one point, you slip in something, definitely not water, and fall onto the deck. A man lunges at you. You roll. Your blade finds his gut. He gasps. You don't look back. You can't. If you stop to think, you stop to die. Historically, naval combat during the golden age of piracy was brutal and short. Most battles lasted less than an hour. Ships didn't want to destroy their prize. After all, what's the point of sinking something you're trying to loot? But the fighting was savage, hand to hand. The noise, the smoke, the claustrophobia, it broke minds as often as it broke bones. Pirates relied on fear as much as firepower. The black flag wasn't a warning, it was a promise. There's one moment burned into your brain. You're ducking behind a mast when you see the enemy captain. He's older. Gray hair, slick with sweat, eyes wild. He points a pistol at your crew's quartermaster and fires. Misses. Your quartermaster returns the favor. Does not miss. The man goes down. A neat hole where his forehead used to be. No drama, just collapse. You don't even hear the thud over the din. Eventually, the fighting slows. One side breaks. This time, you win. The enemy surrenders. Some drop their weapons. Some weep. Some just sit, stunned, surrounded by bodies and blood and ruined crates. Your crew cheers, but it's half-hearted. Too many bruises, too much mess. Victory doesn't taste like glory. It tastes like copper and vomit and smoke. And now comes the worst part, the looting. You help carry crates, sugar, rum, and maybe some gold if you're lucky. More often, it's spices or tobacco or cloth. The injured are dragged aside. The dead are tossed unceremoniously into the sea. There's no time for mourning. No energy. You find yourself stepping over the corpses without blinking. There's a crew vote, what to do with the prisoners. Sometimes they're offered a choice, join or be set adrift. Sometimes they're just left. You don't ask questions anymore. You just do your job. Here's a quirky historical detail. Pirates often tried to avoid full-blown combat if they could. It was expensive, risky. Many relied on sheer intimidation. The flag, the rumors, the reputation. Blackbeard himself would tie lit fuses into his beard to look like a demon rising from the sea. But when intimidation failed, things got ugly fast. You've now seen firsthand what ugly means. There's still debate among historians about how common combat actually was. Some argue it was rare, that most pirate ships won their prizes without a fight. Others believe it happened often, especially when facing stubborn captains or miscommunication. Either way, you now know that a single battle can change everything. People disappear, ships limp away, broken, and even if you live, you're never quite the same. That night, you sit on the deck, blood on your shirt, your hands shaking. Elias sits beside you, a long gash running down his arm. Neither of you speak. You just stare out at the sea. It looks so calm now, like it wasn't just a battlefield a few hours ago, like it hasn't swallowed men and ships for centuries without blinking. You can still smell the powder, still hear the ringing in your ears. You touch the hilt of your sword and realize your hands won't stop trembling. You survived your first real fight. You don't feel heroic. You feel hollow. The smell of powder hasn't faded when you're summoned to the main deck the next morning. Your arms still ache from looting. Your ribs feel bruised from where someone rammed into you with a musket butt. And your stomach churns with leftover fear. But none of that matters. There's another ship on the horizon. The spyglass confirms it. Sails wide, hull deep, likely loaded. You're not even fully done cleaning the blood from your last raid. And now the crew is preparing for another. This is the rhythm of pirate life, feast or famine. Either you're floating through empty waters, eating moldy biscuits, and playing dice for buttons, or you're chasing down ships like a pack of rabid wolves, hoping that they're full of sugar, coin, or at least something edible. The new target is bigger than the last, which could mean two things: more treasure or a worse death. The crew starts working the sails. There's tension in the air. Not fear, not quite, more like hunger, the kind that lives in the belly, in the bones, gnawing. Pirates don't raid for fun, not really. They do it because it's how they eat, how they stay afloat, how they avoid